Hi, I'm Emily. Coming back to my hometown after college should have felt comforting, but stepping into my late father's house felt more like entering a cold, unfamiliar place. My stepdad Paul, his wife Susan, and their kids Mark and Lucy had turned the house into something I barely recognized. The warmth and happiness that once filled the house were gone, replaced by a heavy, uncomfortable silence that felt like it was choking me. "Make sure you clean up after yourself. We don't need more mess around here," Susan said sharply as I pulled my suitcase toward my old room. Lucy stared at me like I was some unwanted guest, whispering just loud enough for me to hear. "Why is she even back? Didn't she get the message to stay away?" Mark didn't even bother pretending to be nice, sneering as he walked past me. "Guess college didn't work out, huh? Came crawling back?" It hurt. These were supposed to be the people who were my family. My dad had married Susan after my mom died when I was just a child. He always hoped Susan and I would get along, and that her kids would be like siblings to me, but after he died suddenly last year, any sense of family disappeared with him. I mostly kept to myself, spending time in my room or hanging out with friends, but the more I tried to avoid problems, the more they pushed me out. They moved my things from shared spaces, threw away my food by accident, and made sure I felt like a stranger in my own home. One evening, when I came back from a walk, I overheard Paul and Susan talking in the kitchen. They didn't notice me standing just outside the doorway. "She has no clue about the will," Paul said. "As far as anyone's concerned, everything went to you and me." Susan's voice was cold and calm as she replied, "Let's keep it that way. The less she knows, the better. We can't afford any trouble." Trouble? My father's will? They were hiding something important. The truth hit me hard. Not only did they not want me here, but they were also trying to keep me from finding out something that might actually belong to me. That night, lying in my old bed, surrounded by boxes I hadn't unpacked, because I never felt at home, I made a decision. I couldn't stay here any longer, not with them. I started planning my escape. I didn't know where I would go, but I knew I had to leave. The next morning, I met my best friend Jamie at the local cafe, and we looked through rental listings. Jamie placed a comforting hand on mine and said with a smile, "You know you can always stay with me until you find a place." "Thanks," I replied. "I might just do that," I replied, trying to force a smile. It was a huge relief to know I had at least one ally in this town. The coffee shop buzzed with the lively chatter of people starting their day, a stark contrast to the suffocating silence at Paul's house. Here, I could breathe. Here, I could think. As I sipped my coffee, a plan slowly began to take shape in my mind. I needed to uncover what they were hiding about my father's will. But first, I had to secure a new place, a safe space where I could regroup and prepare for whatever was coming next. Moving into my tiny apartment felt like stepping into a completely different world, a small, cramped world, but it was mine. The freedom was thrilling, even though the financial pressure was real. I scraped by with an online business, selling handmade crafts I'd started making as a hobby. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning, a step towards something bigger, something that belonged to me. One chilly morning, while updating my online store, I remembered something my dad used to say: "Always carve your own path. No matter how tough it gets, keep your chin up and push forward." His words felt like a soothing balm to my tired spirit. He had always been my source of strength, teaching me how to be resilient when life threw challenges my way. With his advice echoing in my head, I knew it was time to deal with the situation at the house. I needed answers, and there was only one place I could get them. I made an appointment with my dad's lawyer, Mr. Thompson, hoping he could help me figure out what was really going on. Sitting across from him in his office, surrounded by the scent of old books and leather, I felt a mix of nervousness and hope. "I've been wondering about the house," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I have concerns about how things were handled after my father passed." Mr. Thompson adjusted his glasses and pulled a thick file from his desk drawer. "Well, Emily, according to your father's will, the house was left entirely to you." The room seemed to spin as I processed what Mr. Thompson had just told me. "The house belongs to me?" I managed to say, still in shock. "Paul may have had other ideas," Mr. Thompson replied calmly, "but your father was very clear in his intentions. Here, take a look for yourself." He handed me a copy of the will and pointed to a specific clause. My hands trembled as I read it, seeing my father's words written out, a clear confirmation of what should have been mine all along. The drive back to my apartment was a blur of emotions: anger, relief, determination, all swirling inside me like a storm. I thought about the days I'd spent with my dad in our backyard, him teaching me how to negotiate, how to stand my ground, and never let anyone push me around. "You've got to stand tall, Emily," he would say, no matter what. Armed with the truth and my father's lessons, I knew what I had to do. This wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about exposing Paul for the liar he was and for dishonoring my father's memory. That night, I began gathering everything I needed: evidence of Paul's deceit, proof of my rightful claim to the house, and a plan to confront him. I reached out to a few of my dad's old friends who might support my case, and I started documenting everything. I also called Susan, hoping to gauge whether she was aware of what Paul had been doing or if she was involved. Her guarded tone and evasive answers only made me more determined. "Things aren't always what they seem, Emily," she said cautiously, with a trace of unease in her voice. "No, they're not," I replied, my voice hardening, "and soon, everyone will see things for what they really are." As I hung up, a mixture of nerves and resolve settled over me. This wasn't just about fighting for a house, it was about defending my father's legacy, and I was ready. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. I went through boxes of my dad's old papers, finding receipts, emails, and letters that hinted at just how deep Paul's deception ran. Every piece of evidence was carefully organized and catalogued, building my case bit by bit. One evening, while sifting through a box labeled tax documents, I found a letter from a family friend, Mr. Henderson, addressed to my father. The letter detailed a conversation with Paul, where Paul had openly stated his plan to convince everyone that the house should belong to him and Susan after my father's passing. It was the smoking gun I needed. The next day, I met with Mr. Henderson, who was more than willing to provide a sworn statement recounting his conversation with Paul. Armed with this new evidence, I called my cousin Alex, who specialized in real estate law. We met at a small cafe downtown, where I laid out everything I had uncovered. "Emily, you have a strong case here," Alex said, reviewing the documents. "Based on this, Paul's actions could easily be considered fraud. You have rights, and we can fight to enforce them." With Alex's help, we drafted a formal letter to Paul, asserting my legal claim to the house and warning him of the consequences if he continued with his dishonest tactics. It felt incredibly empowering to finally take decisive action, knowing I was on solid ground. But the real turning point came when I decided to confront Susan directly. If she truly didn't know the full extent of Paul's schemes, she deserved to. One afternoon, I invited her to meet for coffee, hoping that in a neutral space, we could talk openly. "Susan, I found something troubling in my father's documents," I began, carefully watching her reaction. "There are inconsistencies in what Paul has told us about the house. According to my father's will, the house was left to me, not to Paul. I have the documents to prove it." Susan's face turned pale, her eyes flickering with a mix of surprise and confusion. I had no idea," she stammered. "Paul told me the house was left to both of us, to secure our future." "I understand this is hard to hear, and I'm not trying to start a conflict," I said, keeping my tone calm but firm, "but you deserve to know the truth. I think Paul has misled both of us." Susan was silent for a moment, then slowly nodded. "I need to think about this, Emily. If what you're saying is true, I need to reassess a lot of things." As we parted, I sensed a shift. Susan's reaction was exactly what I had hoped for, a crack in Paul's lies that could bring everything down. Walking back to my apartment, my resolve hardened. This was no longer just about reclaiming my father's house. It was about justice and making sure my father's wishes were honored, ensuring that deceit wouldn't win. The day of the confrontation felt like the climax of a storm that had been brewing for months. I had everything prepared, the evidence neatly organized in a folder, testimonies from key people, and most importantly, the support of my friends and family. I invited Paul, Susan, and their kids over under the pretense of discussing family matters. As they settled into the living room, the tension was thick. I began, "Thank you all for coming. There's something important we need to talk about regarding my father's house and his will." Paul scoffed, his arrogance clear. "Here we go again, Emily. What now? More accusations?" I didn't flinch. "Not accusations, Paul, facts." I laid out the documents on the coffee table: my father's will, the letter from Mr. Henderson, and legal assessments. According to these documents, confirmed by multiple legal advisors, this house was left to me, not to you. "Paul, you've been lying to everyone." Susan's eyes darted between the papers and Paul. "Is this true? Paul, did you lie about the will?" Paul's calm exterior cracked, his voice rising in desperation. "It's not like that, Susan. I did it for us. For our future. But Susan wasn't buying Paul's excuses. Her expression hardened as she fully turned to face him, her decision clear in her eyes. Lying about this? What else have you lied about, Paul? I can't do this anymore. She stood up, taking Mark and Lucy by the hands. We're leaving. I need to think about what's best for the kids and me. As they walked out, leaving Paul to deal with the mess he'd created, I felt a wave of mixed emotions. There was a sense of vindication for myself, but also sorrow for Susan and the children. In the weeks that followed, word of Paul's deceit spread quickly throughout the community. He didn't just lose his family, his reputation, once built on the image of a respectable family man, was in ruins. Socially ostracized and isolated, he faced the consequences of his actions. Meanwhile, I moved back into the house, the one that had silently witnessed so much of my life. As I unpacked, I came across a box of old letters and photos, memories of my father. Each one reminded me of his love and presence. It was in this home, filled with echoes of the past, that I truly realized what I had reclaimed. I didn't just make the house my home, I turned it into a space for community and healing. The business I'd started out of necessity grew and flourished, and I began hosting workshops to help others who were fighting their own battles against deceit and manipulation. Standing in the newly renovated living room, now alive with laughter and conversation from a local support group meeting, I felt a deep connection to my father's legacy. This house, once a place of conflict, was now a sanctuary, a place of healing and strength. This victory wasn't just about winning back a house or defeating a deceitful stepfather. It was about reclaiming my life, honoring my father's memory, and building a future on the values of integrity and resilience he had instilled in me. And that brings us to the end of the story. Now, I have a question for you. If you were in Susan's position, would you have made the same choice to leave Paul after discovering the truth? Or would you have tried to find another solution? What would you do differently, and why? I'm really interested to hear your thoughts, so please share them in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this. Your support means a lot and helps keep these stories coming. Thanks for watching, and I can't wait to read your responses.
The Ritz-Carlton ballroom sparkled with old money and new pretensions. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light over Silicon Valley's elite as they celebrated the Thompson Family Foundation's annual charity gala. Or rather, celebrated themselves under the guise of charity. I adjusted my Brioni tie, worth more than the cars most of these people drove, and watched my father-in-law Richard Thompson hold court near the Champagne Tower. His wife Margaret's diamond necklace caught the light as she laughed at some venture capitalist's joke. James. Richard's voice carried that particular tone of disdain he reserved just for me. The service entrance is that way. He gestured toward the kitchen doors. The staff tables are in the back. 5 years of marriage to his daughter Emma, and he still treated me like the nobody who'd stolen his princess. If only he knew. Actually, I have an invitation, I said quietly, showing the embossed card. He snatched it, frowning. This must be a mistake. Emma knows better than to dash. I'm her husband, Richard. We've been married 5 years. Yes, he smirked, and still working in, what was it again? Data entry. Close enough to the truth to maintain my cover, far enough to feed his contempt. I'd learned early on that the best way to hide was to let people believe what they wanted to see. The servers section is through those doors, he repeated, louder this time, drawing attention from nearby guests. We wouldn't want to confuse the help with the guests, would we? Emma appeared at his elbow, her face flushed with embarrassment. Dad, please dash. Now, darling, Margaret cut in, your father's right. James would be more comfortable with his own kind. I caught Emma's eye, giving her the slight nod we'd arranged. Time to play along one last time. Of course, I said, taking the server's entrance as directed. Behind me, I heard Richard's booming laugh. At least he knows his place. If he only knew his place in what was about to unfold. From the kitchen, I watched the gala through the service doors. Richard worked the room, bragging about Thompson Technologies' latest contracts, their expanding market share, their upcoming merger with Silicon Valley's biggest names. What he didn't know was that his company's success rested entirely on one client, Quantum Dynamics, the revolutionary AI firm that had transformed global technology. And tonight, Quantum's CEO was finally making their first public appearance. My phone buzzed, 2 minutes to announcement. I straightened my tie and smiled at the actual servers, who'd been quietly taking direction from me all evening. Every detail had been planned, every moment choreographed. Richard clinked his glass, calling for attention. Distinguished guests, as chairman of Thomson Technologies, I'm honored to announce our biggest partnership yet. Quantum Dynamics has chosen us to dash. Actually, a smooth voice interrupted, we should discuss that. Alexander Chin, Quantum's chief operating officer, stepped forward. I'd worked with Alex for years, though Richard had never bothered to learn who really ran the company he desperately wanted to impress. Where is your CO? Richard asked, looking around the room. I was told they'd be here tonight. Oh, they are, Alex smiled, checking his watch. In fact, the main doors opened. Heads turned, expecting another Silicon Valley titan in an expensive suit. But there was only silence. I don't understand, Richard frowned. Where dash? Your CO is already here, I said, stepping out of the service entrance. Has been all evening. The champagne tower trembled as Richard spun around, his face draining of color. No, he whispered. That's impossible. James Carter, Alex announced to the room, founder and CEO of Quantum Dynamics. The youngest CEO on the Fortune 500 and the mind behind the AI revolution that's transformed modern technology. The champagne tower crashed as Margaret's hand flew to her throat, sending crystal glasses cascading across the marble floor. The sound perfectly punctuated the moment of total silence that followed. Emma moved to my side, taking my hand. She'd known all along, had helped maintain my cover while I built Quantum from nothing into a global powerhouse. But you work in data entry, Richard stammered. You live in that tiny apartment. A cover, I replied calmly. One you were all too happy to believe. It's amazing how invisible you become when people think they're above you. Thomson Technologies contracts, he said, realization dawning. All those major projects were with my company. Every deal you bragged about, every contract you celebrated, they all came through me. While you were showing me to the service entrance, I was deciding your company's future. The room had gone completely still. Silicon Valley's elite stood frozen, watching the man they'd dismissed as a nobody reveal himself as the phantom CEO they'd all been desperate to meet. Now, I continued, about that merger you've been promising your shareholders. The silence in the ballroom crackled with tension as I moved toward the main stage, each step echoing against marble floors now littered with broken crystal. The merger, I continued, taking the microphone, needs some clarification. Alex, would you share the slides? The giant screens behind me flickered to life, displaying Quantum Dynamics' global operations. Data centers in Dubai, research facilities in Tokyo, AI development hubs in Stockholm. The empire I'd built while Richard thought I was inputting spreadsheets. Flashback, 5 years earlier. I met Emma at a coffee shop near Thomson Technologies. She was hiding from her father's expectations behind a laptop, working on code that would later become part of Quantum's core architecture. Your algorithm, I said, peering at her screen. You're approaching the AI learning curve from the wrong angle. She looked up, surprised. You understand quantum computing? Enough to know that this, I sketched a different formula on a napkin, would work better. That napkin now hung framed in our secret penthouse office, next to Emma's original code. We were married 3 months later against her father's wishes. He'll never accept you, she warned. Good, I replied. That'll make it easier to hide in plain sight. We kept my growing company secret, using Richard's contempt as our perfect cover. The smaller he made me feel, the bigger Quantum grew. Present day. Quantum Dynamics, I announced to the stunned gala audience, has become the world's leading AI technology provider. Our market cap exceeded $300 billion last quarter. Richard gripped a chair for support. The man who'd spent 5 years treating me like a servant was watching his entire worldview shatter. But surely, Margaret sputtered, we would have known, the press. Would you? I clicked to the next slide. When you were so convinced I was nothing. When you seated me with servers and called me the help? The screens showed press coverage of Quantum's mysterious suit. Always in shadows, never photographed directly. Silicon Valley's biggest mystery, hiding behind carefully crafted anonymity. Thomson Technologies, I continued, has been a useful partner. But let's be clear about who works for whom. Alex stepped forward with a folder. The merger documents as requested. Richard reached for them with trembling hands. But I thought, we were acquiring. No, Richard. Quantum is acquiring Thomson Technologies. The papers your board approved last week? They give us controlling interest. The crowd murmured. Several phones appeared, shareholders frantically checking stock prices. You see, I explained, while you were showing me to the service entrance, your board was signing control to the very person you thought was beneath you. Emma joined me on stage, her designer dress a far cry from the simple clothes she wore to family dinners. Dad, did you ever wonder how your small regional tech company suddenly landed contracts with global giants? You. He looked at her with dawning horror. You knew. I'm Quantum's chief technology officer, she said. Have been since before we married. James and I built this company together while you were busy being ashamed of him. The screens filled with Quantum's organizational chart. Emma's name near the top, alongside Alex and other executives Richard had desperately tried to impress at parties. All those meetings, Margaret whispered. When you said you were visiting friends. I was running a global technology company, Emma replied. One that now owns controlling interest in Thomson Technologies. I turned to the gathered executives and investors. For those wondering about their positions, don't worry. Quantum believes in merit-based leadership. Unlike some, we don't judge people by their social status or family connections. Richard's face had turned an interesting shade of gray. The apartment, that tiny one-bedroom where you live, is one of many properties we maintain for privacy, I explained. Our actual residence is the penthouse your real estate agent tried to sell you last month. The one you said only a real CEO could afford. The irony hung heavy in the air as Richard remembered his own words. Your office, he said weakly. That small cubicle when you visited Thomson Technologies. Was perfect for observing how you really treat people when you think they're beneath you. I smiled. Amazing what you can learn from a cubicle. The room had shifted now. Power dynamics realigning as Silicon Valley's elite process to I really was. The same people who'd ignored me all evening were suddenly finding reasons to move closer. The merger proceeds as planned, I announced. Though there will be some changes in leadership. I paused, looking directly at Richard. Starting at the top. The next morning, Thomson Technologies' lobby buzzed with nervous energy. Employees watched wide-eyed as I walked through the front doors. Not to the small cubicle they were accustomed to seeing me occupy, but straight to the executive elevator. Richard's corner office offered a panoramic view of Silicon Valley. He sat behind his desk, looking somehow smaller without his usual arrogance. The board meeting starts in 10 minutes, I said, not bothering to knock. Ready to announce your retirement? He looked up, years of carefully constructed superiority crumbling. You planned this. All of it. From the beginning. Not exactly. I took the seat across from him, his seat soon enough. When I met Emma, I was already building Quantum. But you made hiding it remarkably easy. Your assumptions about me, your need to put me in my place. It was the perfect cover. The dinner parties, he said quietly. When we seated you in the kitchen. I was closing billion-dollar deals on my phone while your servers shared their coffee with me. Good people, by the way. They're all getting significant raises. Emma entered, tablet in hand. The shareholders are assembled. Dad? Mom's here too. The boardroom fell silent as we entered. Margaret sat rigid in her chair, her perfect society makeup unable to hide her sleepless night. The board members, Richard's carefully chosen cronies, shifted uncomfortably. Before we begin, I said, taking the chairman's position, let's address the elephant in the room. Yes, I'm the CEO of Quantum Dynamics. Yes, we now own controlling interest in Thomson Technologies. And yes, everything you thought you knew about the power dynamics in this room was wrong. Alex began distributing folders. Our first order of business is restructuring the board. We believe in diverse perspectives, not country club connections. You can't just. One of Richard's golf buddies started. Actually, we can. And we are. Emma pulled up the shareholding structure. Quantum owns 51% of voting shares. That's what those papers you signed last week actually meant. Richard stared at the table while his carefully constructed empire transformed. His board allies were replaced by tech innovators, diversity champions, and actual industry experts. As for the Thomson family, I continued, Richard will announce his retirement this afternoon. Margaret will step down from the foundation board. And the company name. You're erasing us completely? Margaret's voice trembled. No. Unlike you, we don't believe in erasing people. I clicked to the next slide. Thomson Quantum Technologies. A partnership if you're willing to earn it. The next hour outlined our vision. Merging Thomson's regional connections with Quantum's global innovation. Real charity work, not social posturing. Merit-based advancement, not family ties. And my position? Richard finally asked. Advisory board, Emma answered. If you can adapt to not being in charge. We're offering you a chance to be part of something bigger than your ego, Dad. As the board filed out, Margaret lingered. The foundation gala. You let us humiliate ourselves. You humiliated yourselves long before that, I replied. We just stopped protecting you from the consequences. The next few weeks transformed Thomson Technologies. The servants' entrance became a shared employee entrance for everyone. The executive dining room opened to all staff. Merit replaced nepotism in promotions. Real charitable initiatives replaced social photo ops. Richard struggled with his new reality. I'd catch him staring at my office, his old office, with a mix of resentment and dawning respect. 1 month after the gala, he appeared at my door. The coding program for underprivileged students. It was your idea? Emma's actually. She never forgot how you dismissed her interest in programming as unfeminine. He nodded slowly. I've been watching how you run things. It's not what I expected. Because I don't need to prove my worth through other people's humiliation. I deserve that, he admitted. And more. True. But this isn't about revenge, Richard. It's about building something better than what your pride created. The company newsletter that week featured our first joint project, a tech education center in the same neighborhood where I'd grown up. The photo showed Richard working alongside the maintenance staff he'd once ignored, setting up computers for local kids. Emma found me looking at the picture. He's trying, she said. I know. That's more than we expected. At that evening's board meeting, Richard sat quietly in his advisory role, taking notes instead of giving orders. Margaret had joined the foundation's actual charitable works, discovering she had a talent for connecting with people when she stopped ranking them by status. My phone buzzed with a message from Alex. Annual tech conference wants you as keynote speaker. Ready to go public officially? I looked around the boardroom. At Richard learning to listen. At Margaret learning to serve. At the company transforming from a symbol of privilege to a force for change. Schedule it, I replied. Time to step into the light. The next morning I drove my usual modest car to the office. The security guard, who'd once been instructed to direct me to the service parking, smiled and waved me to the CEO's spot. Still can't believe they never knew, he said. Sometimes, I replied, the best way to see people's true character is to let them think they're above you. In my office I found a handwritten note from Richard. I spent years looking down on you, never realizing I was the one who needed to rise. Thank you for showing me what real leadership looks like. Your father-in-law, if you'll still have me as one. I pinned it next to Emma's original code and the napkin where our journey began. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't in proving others wrong, but in giving them a chance to prove themselves better. The company announcement went out that afternoon. Thomson Quantum Technologies, building tomorrow together. Below the headline was a photo of the entire staff, executives, maintenance workers, security guards, and cafeteria staff, all entering through the same door. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's transformation. My name is Isabella Martinez Walsh, and 3 months ago I thought I understood what family meant. I'm 31, an artist living in Portland, Oregon, and until my mother-in-law took a crowbar to my life's work while screaming about whose art really mattered, I believed that marriage meant joining a family that would support your dreams. The sound of canvas tearing and wood splintering still echoes in my mind, not because it broke me, but because it freed me from pretending that people who never saw my worth deserved access to my world. I met James Walsh 4 years ago at a coffee shop in the Pearl District. He was reading about architecture while I sketched afternoon light falling across strangers' faces. When he saw my drawing, his genuine amazement felt like recognition. You see things differently, he said. For the first time in years, someone saw my art and understood it was more than a hobby. James came from what he called an artistic family. His mother, Patricia Walsh, had run a small gallery for 15 years. His father collected vintage photographs. His younger brother David painted abstract pieces that James described as raw and emotional. I was excited to meet them, imagining conversations about technique and inspiration. The first family dinner should have been a warning. Patricia greeted me politely but spent most of the evening discussing David's upcoming cafe show. When James mentioned I was also an artist, her response was measured. "How nice. What kind of art do you do?" I explained that I worked primarily in oil paintings, focusing on portraiture and urban landscapes. Patricia nodded and immediately turned back to David. "Your brother's abstract work is so powerful. There's something about non-representational art that reaches deeper into the soul." The dismissal was subtle but clear. David's splashes of color reached the soul. My careful attention to human expression was apparently surface level. Over the next 2 years, as James and I grew closer and eventually married, his family's attitude remained consistently dismissive. They attended David's shows but were always busy when I had exhibitions. They bought David's paintings but never asked to see mine. When I won a regional portrait competition, Patricia's congratulations felt rehearsed. "How wonderful for you, dear." After we married, I needed a proper studio. My art had been gaining recognition. Steady sales through a downtown gallery, commissioned portraits, even a feature in Portland Monthly magazine. We found a converted warehouse space in southeast Portland with perfect northern exposure and high ceilings. "This is perfect for Isabella's studio," James told his parents during Sunday dinner. "She's been working out of our spare bedroom, but this will let her really expand." Patricia set down her fork carefully. "A whole studio seems like quite an expense for a hobby." A hobby. 2 years of marriage, dozens of sold paintings, magazine features, and she still saw my work as a hobby. "It's not a hobby, Mom," James defended me. "Isabella's a professional artist. She makes good money from her work." "Of course, dear," Patricia replied, but her tone suggested she was humoring us. Despite her disapproval, we signed the lease. I spent weeks setting up the studio and my work flourished in the new environment. I completed a series of urban portraits that captured Portland's diversity and energy. The gallery sold every piece within a month. I began getting commissions from collectors who specifically sought out my work. But success made Patricia's dismissal more pointed. When people mentioned my art at gatherings, she would change the subject to David's work. When I was featured in a prestigious downtown gallery show, she attended but spent the entire time discussing how David was preparing for something really significant. David, meanwhile, was struggling. His abstract work wasn't selling and the cafe shows were actually just coffee shop wall space. But in Patricia's narrative, David was the real artist facing challenges while I was somehow cheating by creating work people actually wanted to buy. The first direct challenge came last spring. David had been living at home using the garage as his workspace. Patricia decided he needed professional studio space to take his art to the next level. Isabella's studio would be perfect for David, she announced during a family barbecue. It has everything he needs. I laughed, thinking she was joking. David's welcome to visit anytime, but it's my studio. I need the space for my work. Patricia's expression hardened. David is family. Surely family should support each other's artistic development. The conversation that followed was surreal. Patricia suggested I could share the studio with David, working around his schedule. When I pointed out that I had commissioned work and needed consistent access, she implied I was being selfish. David's art is more experimental, she explained. He needs room to explore. Your work is more established. You could probably paint anywhere. Established. As if my years of developing technique made my work less deserving of proper space. James tried to mediate, suggesting David find his own studio nearby. But Patricia had fixated on my space specifically. Over the following weeks, the pressure intensified. Robert joined the campaign, mentioning how generous it would be for me to help David's career. Isabella doesn't understand what it's like to struggle as an artist, David said during one dinner. Everything comes easily to her. Everything came easily. 7 years of art school, 15 years of developing technique, countless rejections and slow career building. But because my work sold and his didn't, I was having it easy. The demands became more direct as summer progressed. Patricia began referring to David's future studio when talking about my space. She started bringing potential collectors to family gatherings and steering them toward David's work while avoiding mentions of mine. When I won a significant commission, portraits for a local law firm, Patricia's congratulations came with a suggestion. This success shows you don't really need that big studio anymore. You could work smaller and let David have the space. My success was being used as evidence that I should give up the resources that made it possible. The final confrontation came on a Saturday morning in late September. I was in my studio working on a complex portrait with a tight deadline when I heard voices outside. Patricia's voice, sharp with authority. I don't care if she's working. This has gone on long enough. David's voice, whiny and entitled. She's had this space for over a year. It's my turn. I opened the door. Patricia stood there with David, both looking determined and guilty. What are you doing here? I asked. We need to talk, Patricia announced, pushing past me into the studio. The conversation that followed was manipulation disguised as family concern. Patricia had brought legal documents, papers that would transfer my studio lease to David. She'd researched the building's policies and discovered that with family signatures, the lease could be reassigned. David needs this space, she said, setting papers on my work table near my wet palette. Your art is doing well enough that you can afford somewhere else. This is about family supporting family. I stared at the documents, my signature line highlighted in yellow. You want me to give up my studio so David can have it. We want you to help your brother-in-law achieve his potential, Patricia corrected. You've had your time to establish yourself. Now it's David's turn. My time. As if artistic development was a resource to be shared equally rather than something earned through dedication. No, I said simply. Patricia blinked, clearly not expecting direct refusal. Excuse me. No, I repeated. I won't sign over my studio. David can find his own studio. What happened next revealed the true depth of their entitlement. Patricia's politeness evaporated, replaced by raw fury. You're being incredibly selfish, she hissed. David is family. Your success should benefit the whole family. David stepped forward, his face flushed. You think you're so much better because people buy your paintings. But your work isn't even real art. It's just copying what you see. Just copying. Years of studying light, composition, human expression, reduced to copying by someone whose work consisted of angry smears across canvas. Get out, I said quietly. We're not leaving until you sign these papers, Patricia declared. This family has supported you for years and now it's time to give back. Supported me. They'd attended exactly one of my shows, bought 0 pieces and spent 3 years undermining my credibility. I reached for my phone. I'm calling James. That's when Patricia lost control completely. She looked around my studio, at the paintings I was working on, the completed pieces waiting for delivery. Her expression shifted from anger to something colder. David's art matters more than yours, she said, her voice dropping to deadly calm. And if you won't recognize that willingly, maybe we need to help you understand. She picked up a palette knife from my work table and walked toward my easel. The palette knife sliced through the canvas I'd been working on, tearing the CEO's carefully rendered face from forehead to chin. The sound was like a physical blow. But she didn't stop there. Patricia grabbed a crowbar that another artist had left against the wall and began systematically destroying everything in my studio. David's art matters more than yours, she screamed, smashing the crowbar into completed portraits waiting for pickup. Canvas tore, frames splintered, paint scattered across the floor like blood. I watched in stunned silence as she destroyed painting after painting. A portrait of a local judge that had taken weeks. A series of neighborhood children commissioned as gifts. A self-portrait I'd painted during my engagement, capturing the happiness I'd felt at joining his family. David stood in the doorway, no longer protesting, just watching as his mother cleared the way for his artistic success. His expression wasn't horror, it was satisfaction mixed with guilt. The destruction lasted maybe 5 minutes but felt like hours. When Patricia finally stopped, breathing heavily, my studio looked like a crime scene. Torn canvas, broken frames, scattered paint, years of work reduced to debris. There, she panted, dropping the crowbar. Now you understand what really matters in this family. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood there, surrounded by wreckage, and felt something inside me shift permanently. Not break, shift. Like a bone setting itself after a fracture harder than before. Patricia and David left without another word. Instead of calling James in tears, I pulled out my phone and called Elena Rodriguez, the owner of Rodriguez Gallery where I'd been showing my work for 3 years. Elena, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. I need you to come to my studio immediately. And bring a camera. Elena arrived 20 minutes later, took one look at the destruction, and started documenting everything with methodical precision. She photographed the destroyed paintings, the scattered materials, the crowbar still lying where Patricia had dropped it. Isabella, she said softly, do you know what they've done? I shook my head. Beyond destroyed my work, I wasn't sure what she meant. Elena picked up a fragment of canvas, part of the judge's portrait. This piece alone was worth $15,000. And this series, she gestured toward the destroyed children's portraits. These were commissioned for $25,000 total. I stared at her, the numbers not computing through my shock. Isabella, Elena continued urgently, they've destroyed approximately $140,000 worth of completed and in-progress artwork. This isn't just vandalism, it's destruction of significant financial assets. $140,000. In their fury at my refusal, Patricia and David had destroyed more money than most people made in several years. But Elena wasn't finished. She pulled out her tablet, scrolling through digital files. Do you realize what some of these destroyed pieces represent? She showed me images from my recent exhibition, the urban portrait series that had sold out completely. The collectors who bought from that series have been asking about similar pieces. There's a waiting list. A waiting list. For my work. My supposedly inferior art that wasn't experimental enough. Elena, I said slowly, what exactly are you telling me? She looked at me with the expression of someone delivering life-changing news. I'm telling you that Patricia Walsh just destroyed the work of one of Portland's most promising emerging artists. The portrait series you were working on was pre-sold to collectors. Next month's exhibition was going to establish you as a significant regional artist. Next month's exhibition. In all the chaos I'd forgotten. Elena had been planning a solo show. My first major solo exhibition. The exhibition can still happen, Elena said firmly. But not with these pieces. We'll need to decide how to proceed. That's when my phone rang. James calling from his hiking trip. I answered without saying hello. Your mother destroyed my studio. Silence. Finally, James's voice, small and confused. What do you mean, destroyed? I looked around at the devastation. I mean, she took a crowbar to every painting while screaming about how David's art matters more than mine. That's impossible. Mom would never. Elena's here documenting everything for insurance and police reports, I continued. She estimates about $140,000 in damage. Another long silence. I'm coming home. Don't do anything until I get there. Don't do anything. As if there was some way to undo the destruction or restore months of work. I spent the rest of the day with Elena, cataloging the destruction and discussing options. She helped me understand that this wasn't just about lost paintings. It was about my position in the Portland art scene that Patricia had never grasped. Isabella, Elena said as we finished documenting, your mother-in-law didn't just destroy paintings. She destroyed pieces that were going to launch you into a different tier of recognition entirely. The irony was staggering. Patricia had destroyed my work to clear the way for David's success, not realizing she just eliminated one of the most promising careers in the local art scene. James arrived 3 hours later, his face pale as he took in the destruction. He walked through the debris like someone surveying a natural disaster. I don't understand, he kept saying. This isn't like her. Not violent, just entitled. Not destructive. Just convinced that David's needs superseded everyone else's rights. That evening we met with Patricia and Robert. David was absent, probably realizing that witnessing the aftermath might be uncomfortable. Patricia had clearly spent the day crafting her defense. She greeted us with forced calm, offering coffee like we were there for a routine visit. I hope you've had time to think about what happened, she began. Family situations can become emotional, but... You destroyed $140,000 worth of artwork, I interrupted. The number hit the room like a bomb. Robert's coffee cup froze halfway to his lips. Patricia's composed expression flickered. That's ridiculous, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Those were just paintings. Just paintings. Elena's documentation folder sat between us. Photos of destroyed work, insurance estimates, market valuations. James opened the folder, showing his parents images of the destruction. "Mom, look at this. Really look at what you did." Patricia glanced at the photos, then looked away quickly. I may have gotten carried away, but Isabella was being completely unreasonable. "David needs support," Robert added. "Isabella's already established. She can recover from this. She can recover from this." As if destroying someone's life work was a minor setback. That's when I realized they would never understand. In their minds, I was still the daughter-in-law whose success came too easily, whose career was less valid than David's struggles. "I'm filing police reports and insurance claims," I said calmly. "Elena is helping me document everything for potential legal action." Patricia's composure finally cracked. "You're going to sue us? Over some paintings?" "Some paintings." Even now, she couldn't acknowledge the magnitude of her actions. "I'm going to hold you accountable for destroying my livelihood," I corrected. 3 months later, the consequences have become clear. The insurance investigation determined that Patricia's destruction constituted willful vandalism. Her homeowner's insurance won't cover the claims, leaving her personally liable for the full value. Elena postponed my solo exhibition but didn't cancel it. Instead, she's been working with me to create new pieces that incorporate the story of the destruction itself. The exhibition, now titled Reconstruction, opens next month and has already generated significant media attention. Collectors who had been interested before are now actively seeking pieces, partly because of the notoriety but mostly because Elena positioned me as an artist who emerged stronger from adversity. David never got my studio. The other artists in the building made it clear he wasn't welcome. He's back to working in his parents' garage, his experiments now competing with their legal bills. James and I are in counseling, working through the trauma of his family's betrayal. Some days I think we'll make it. Other days, the weight of knowing his mother destroyed years of my work feels too heavy to carry. But my art survives. Changed, evolved, marked by the experience but not destroyed by it. Patricia taught me something valuable about the difference between family that supports you and family that consumes you. She thought she was clearing the way for David's success. Instead, she revealed the true value of what she tried to destroy and gave me the freedom to build something even stronger. The crowbar is gone, but the art remains. Scarred, reconstructed, but undeniably mine. My name is Elena Rodriguez, and 6 months ago I thought I understood what family meant. I'm 28, the owner of what used to be a successful restaurant chain in Phoenix, and until my mother called the police to have me arrested for stealing from my own business, I believed that success was something to be celebrated, not confiscated. The moment those handcuffs threatened to click around my wrists while my stepbrother Marcus smirked behind my mother's shoulder, I realized that some families don't support your dreams, they harvest them. It started when I was 16, working at my grandmother's food truck after school. Abuela Rosa had been serving authentic Mexican street food from a converted van for 20 years, parking outside construction sites across Phoenix. Her carne asada was legendary, but the business barely supported her. I loved everything about that truck. The sizzle of meat on the grill, the way customers' faces lit up when they saw us, the pride in Abuela's voice when someone complimented her recipes. But I also saw the missed opportunities. The inconsistent locations, the lack of marketing, the cash-only system that limited growth. "Abuela," I said one afternoon as we cleaned the grill, "what if we could serve more people? Multiple trucks, better locations, maybe even a permanent restaurant." She laughed with the tired wisdom of someone who'd spent decades making do. "Mija, dreams are beautiful but dreams don't pay rent." I was 17 when my mother married Richard Martinez, bringing his son Marcus into our family. Marcus was 21, charming in the way people who've never faced consequences tend to be, and completely uninterested in anything requiring actual work. He dropped out of college twice, spent 6 months finding himself in Costa Rica on Richard's dime, and spoke confidently about entrepreneurial vision while living rent-free. My mother, Sandra, had been a single parent since my father died when I was 8. She'd worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat, and Richard's financial stability represented security she'd never had. She began seeing Marcus not as her stepson, but as the successful child she'd always wanted. "Marcus has such good business instincts," she would say after he'd pitched half-baked schemes requiring upfront investment but no labor from him. He sees the big picture. The big picture was always someone else doing the work while Marcus took credit for the vision. I spent senior year developing a real business plan for expanding Abuela's operation. I researched permits, studied successful food truck franchises, calculated startup costs. When I graduated, instead of going to college immediately, I asked Abuela if I could invest my college savings into modernizing her business. "You want to put your education money into an old woman's taco truck?" she asked, incredulous. "I want to put it into learning how to build something real," I corrected. "College will still be there. This opportunity might not be." We started small. New equipment, a point-of-sale system accepting cards, social media marketing, and regular locations so customers knew where to find us. Within 6 months, daily revenue had tripled. Within a year we had a waiting list of locations wanting us. I proposed expansion. 2 additional trucks with carefully planned routes and specialized menus. Abuela would oversee the original truck and train new staff. I would handle operations, marketing, and business development. We secured a small business loan, bought 2 used trucks, and spent 3 months retrofitting them. I worked 18-hour days learning every aspect: cooking, inventory management, staff scheduling, health department regulations. By my 20th birthday, Rosa's authentic Mexican food had 3 trucks serving different areas of Phoenix. The success was immediate. Food bloggers discovered us. Local news featured our authentic family recipes with modern business savvy. Revenue grew from hundreds to several $1,000s daily across all trucks. That's when my family started paying attention. "Elena's doing really well with the food truck thing," my mother mentioned to Richard. "Maybe Marcus could get involved, bring some fresh perspective." Fresh perspective. Marcus had never worked in food service, knew nothing about restaurant operations, and spoke Spanish badly enough that our Latino customers found it offensive. But he had opinions about branding and leveraging our success for maximum growth potential. "You need to think bigger," Marcus told me during unsolicited consultations. "Food trucks are small time. You should be looking at brick-and-mortar locations, franchising opportunities." He wasn't wrong about thinking bigger. I'd been planning the next phase for months. But Marcus's version involved him taking over strategic planning while I continued handling operations. Essentially, him getting credit for vision while I did actual work. "I appreciate the input," I told him diplomatically, "but I've got expansion plans handled." Marcus's expression shifted, the charming smile taking on an edge. "Elena, you've done great work getting this started, but you need people with real business experience." Real business experience. From someone whose longest employment had been a 4-month internship at his father's insurance office, which he'd quit because the hours were too restrictive. During family gatherings, Marcus would hold court about our family business and his plans for taking it to the next level. He always spoke as if he were already involved in decision-making, as if my role was implementation rather than leadership. By my 22nd birthday, we'd expanded to 5 trucks and opened our first brick-and-mortar location. Rosa's authentic Mexican food was featured in Phoenix magazine as one of the city's most promising small businesses. The restaurant had a 2-week waiting list for weekends. "This is incredible, Elena," my mother said during the grand opening. Marcus's ideas about expansion were really smart. Marcus's ideas. Ideas I'd been developing and implementing for 2 years while he offered commentary from the sidelines. "Actually, Mom, these were my plans," I said gently. "Of course, Mija," she interrupted, "but family input makes a business strong. Marcus really helped you think it through." Family input. As if Marcus's occasional suggestions carried the same weight as my years of 18-hour days, my financial investment, my relationships with suppliers and customers. Marcus began introducing himself to business contacts as Elena's business partner. He started attending industry events without invitation, representing himself as a key decision-maker. When business journals wanted interviews about our success, Marcus made sure he was included and quoted extensively about our family's entrepreneurial journey. The first direct challenge came when we were considering major expansion. 3 new restaurants in Tucson and Flagstaff. The investment was substantial and I'd been working with banks and investors for months. "Elena," Richard said during family dinner, "Marcus has some concerns about this expansion plan." "Concerns?" Marcus, who'd never been responsible for a business decision in his life, had concerns about my carefully researched growth strategy. The timeline is too aggressive, Marcus said, pulling out prepared documents. The capital requirements are unrealistic. Elena's letting ambition override sound business judgment. My ambition. The same ambition that had built our success from a single food truck to a thriving restaurant group. The conversation continued for 2 hours, with Marcus presenting every possible obstacle while I explained mitigation strategies. By the end, my mother and Richard were convinced that Marcus's cautious approach was more responsible than my aggressive growth plans. Maybe you should consider bringing Marcus in as an official partner, my mother suggested. 2 heads are better than 1. Official partner. Someone who would have equal say despite never having invested time, money, or effort into building the company. The pressure intensified over summer. Every family gathering included discussions about Marcus's partnership. Richard began mentioning how proud he was of what the kids had built together. My mother started referring to Elena and Marcus's restaurants. When I was offered the opportunity to appear on a national television show about young entrepreneurs, my mother's response was immediate. This is perfect for both of you. You and Marcus can represent the business together. Mom, they specifically asked for me. It's about my entrepreneurial journey. But Marcus is part of that journey now. It would look strange if he wasn't included. I did the interview alone, explaining how I'd built Rosa's authentic Mexican food through hard work, strategic planning, and reinvestment of profits. When it aired, I was proud to see Abuela's story getting national attention. Marcus was furious. That interview made it look like you built this whole business yourself, he confronted me. You completely erased the family's contribution. The family's contribution. Abuela's recipes and work ethic, yes. My mother's moral support occasionally. Marcus's opinions about things he'd never done. I built this business with Abuela, I said. Everyone else has been supportive, but the work was ours. That's not how family businesses work, Marcus shot back. Success is shared. Everyone benefits, everyone gets credit. Everyone benefits, everyone gets credit. But not everyone does the work or takes the risks. That conversation marked the beginning of an all-out campaign to force me into partnership with Marcus. My mother and Richard tag-teamed me with guilt trips about family loyalty. Marcus began showing up at restaurant locations, introducing himself to staff as the co-owner, and making decisions about scheduling. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning in October. I arrived at our flagship restaurant to find Marcus in my office, going through financial records with my accountant. What's going on here? I asked. Marcus is reviewing quarterly reports, my accountant explained, looking uncomfortable. He said you'd asked him to take over financial oversight. Financial oversight. Of my business, my investment, my 6 years of work. I need to speak with Marcus privately, I said. After my accountant left, I turned to Marcus with as much patience as I could muster. You can't just show up and start making decisions about my business. Our business, Marcus corrected. And someone needs to be making responsible decisions around here. Our business. The assumption that had been building for months finally stated openly. This is my business, Marcus. I built it, I own it, I run it. Marcus leaned back in my chair with a smile that made my skin crawl. Actually, Elena, I think you need to check your facts. He slid a folder across the desk. Inside were legal documents that made my blood freeze. Incorporation papers listing Marcus Martinez as co-founder and equal partner. Bank signature cards adding him as authorized signatory. Loan documents naming him as co-borrower. What is this? I whispered. This is the legal reality of our family business, Marcus said. While you've been focused on operations, I've been handling legal and financial structure. Having connections makes certain things easier to arrange. Connections. Richard's insurance contacts, his relationship with our family banker, his ability to present Marcus as a legitimate business partner to people who'd never met me. These documents are fraudulent, I said, my voice shaking. I never signed anything making you a partner. Marcus's smile widened. Check the signatures, Elena. Everything's perfectly legal. I stared at the documents, recognizing my signature on papers I'd never seen. Then I realized what had happened. The stack of insurance updates and bank forms that Richard had asked me to sign over the past year Paperwork I'd trusted him to handle while I focused on running the restaurants. You forged these, I said. I facilitated them, Marcus corrected. Big difference. And now that our partnership is properly documented, we need to discuss operational changes. Get out, I said quietly. Elena, this is as much my office as yours now. Get out. I screamed loud enough that several employees came running. Marcus left, but not before making his position clear. This isn't over, Elena. Family means compromise. I spent the rest of the day with my attorney, Elizabeth Santos, reviewing the fraudulent documents. The legal situation was complex. While the signatures had clearly been forged, proving that in court would be expensive and time-consuming. Meanwhile, Marcus could use the documents to interfere with operations. There's another issue, Elizabeth warned. If Marcus presents these documents to your banks or investors, it could create serious problems with your credit lines. That evening, I met with Abuela to explain what was happening. She listened in silence as I described the forged documents, Marcus's claims of partnership, the potential destruction of everything we'd built. Mija, she said finally, what does your heart tell you to do? My heart told me to fight to protect what we'd created. But my head worried about the cost of that fight. I don't know, Abuela. If I fight this, we might lose everything anyway. She was quiet for a long moment, looking at the original food truck parked in her driveway. Elena, she said, your grandfather built our family's first restaurant with his bare hands. During the Depression, men came who said they owned it, had papers that proved it. He fought them in court for 3 years. What happened? He lost the restaurant. But he kept his recipes, his reputation, and his knowledge. 6 months later, he opened a new place that was twice as successful. Those men got the building, but they couldn't run a restaurant. It failed within a year. Her meaning was clear. Marcus could steal the legal structure of my business, but he couldn't steal the skills and knowledge that had made it successful. The final confrontation came on a Friday morning. I arrived at the flagship restaurant to find Marcus behind the host station, greeting customers and directing staff like he owned the place. Elena, he called cheerfully. Perfect timing. I've been implementing some operational improvements we discussed. The dining room was chaos. Servers looked confused, the kitchen was backed up, customers were waiting longer than usual for tables. What did you do? I asked. Optimized our systems, Marcus replied proudly. New scheduling protocols, updated inventory management, revised menu pricing. Small changes that'll add up to big improvements. Small changes. He'd rearranged everything that worked and replaced it with systems he'd read about but never tested. If you're my equal partner, I said loud enough for customers and staff to hear, then you can handle the lunch rush yourself. I'll be in the office handling paperwork. I walked to my office and made a series of phone calls. First to Elizabeth, my attorney. Then to Miguel Santos, a trusted restaurant manager who'd been wanting to start his own place. Finally to landlords of 3 prime locations that had been courting us. Through my window I could see Marcus trying to manage lunch service. He was in over his head within minutes. Customers complaining about wait times, servers asking questions he couldn't answer, kitchen staff ignoring his contradictory instructions. By 2 p.m. 2 customers had walked out without paying, the kitchen had run out of 3 menu items, and Marcus was hiding in the storage room overwhelmed. That's when my mother and Richard arrived, summoned by Marcus's panicked call. Elena, my mother said, marching into my office, you need to help Marcus. This is no time for family politics. Family politics. As if Marcus's theft of my business was a minor squabble rather than actual fraud. I'm not part of restaurant operations anymore, I said calmly. Marcus made it clear that he's handling things now. Don't be ridiculous, Richard snapped. You can't just abandon the business because you're having a disagreement. I'm trusting my equal partner to handle the responsibilities he claimed he was ready for. By closing time, the restaurant had lost money for the first time in 3 years. Marcus had managed to alienate servers, confuse kitchen staff, and serve customers food that didn't match their orders. Over the next week, Marcus's attempts to run the restaurants resulted in inventory shortages, staff resignations, and customer complaints. Revenue dropped 40% as word spread that service had declined dramatically. You have to step back in, Richard demanded during an emergency family meeting. Marcus is learning, but he needs time. If Marcus needs time to learn, he should start with his own restaurant, I suggested. That's when my mother made the accusation that would change everything. You're sabotaging the business, she said, voice shaking with anger. You're deliberately letting things fail to make Marcus look bad. I'm watching the business partner you forced on me demonstrate why partnerships require mutual competence. You're being selfish, my mother continued. This business belongs to the whole family, not just you. Actually, Mom, I said, standing up, I think it's time we clarified exactly who this business belongs to. I walked to my office safe and retrieved a folder I'd been preparing for weeks. Inside were the real ownership documents. Original incorporation papers, loan agreements with my signature and no one else's, trademark registrations, licensing agreements. These are the actual legal documents for Rose's authentic Mexican food, I said, spreading them across the table. My family stared at the papers, their confidence wavering. Marcus's documents are forgeries, I continued. Fraud, actually. And I've been documenting his use of them to steal control of my business. You can't prove those signatures were forged, Richard said. Actually, I can, I replied. My attorney has expert analysis showing the signatures were traced from legitimate documents. We also have testimony from bank employees about unusual requests that didn't match normal procedures. Marcus's face had gone pale. Elena, we can work this out. Family shouldn't fight about business. Here's what's going to happen, I said. Marcus will stop representing himself as an owner. He'll return any keys or documents he obtained fraudulently. And he'll sign acknowledgement that he has no ownership interest in Rose's authentic Mexican food. And if he doesn't, my mother asked, then I file criminal charges for fraud and identity theft. I also sue for damages caused by his interference. You're really going to destroy your own family over money? My mother asked. I'm going to protect what I built from people who think they can take it without earning it, I corrected. That's when my mother made the decision that would end our relationship permanently. Instead of accepting that Marcus's claims were fraudulent, she decided to escalate. If you won't be reasonable, she said, pulling out her phone, then we'll let the authorities sort this out. She dialed 911 while staring at me with cold determination. I need to report a theft in progress, she told the dispatcher. My daughter is stealing from the family business. I watched in amazement as my own mother described me as a criminal to the police. She told them I was illegally excluding legitimate business partners and hiding assets from co-owners. She's here right now, my mother concluded, stealing documents and trying to change bank account access. 20 minutes later, 2 Phoenix police officers arrived. My mother met them at the door, her performance of concerned family member convincing and well-rehearsed. Officers, thank you for coming so quickly, she said, leading them to where I was sitting with the real ownership documents spread across my desk. Ma'am, we received a report about theft from a family business, the first officer said. Can you explain what's happening? Before I could respond, my mother jumped in with her version. According to her story, Marcus and I were equal partners, but I was trying to steal his share by hiding documents and changing bank access. She's always been jealous of Marcus, my mother told the officers. Now she's using the business as a weapon against him. The officers listened politely, then turned to me. Miss, what's your response to these allegations? I looked at my mother, at Marcus hovering behind her with guilt and hope, at Richard filming the confrontation like he was documenting evidence. Officers, I said calmly, I'm the sole owner of this business. I have documentation proving that. What you're witnessing is a family attempt to steal my company using forged documents. I handed over the real ownership papers, expert analysis of the forged signatures, and Elizabeth's legal brief documenting the fraud Marcus had committed. The officers spent 20 minutes reviewing documents and asking questions. It quickly became clear that this wasn't a simple family dispute. This was attempted theft using fraudulent paperwork. Ma'am, the first officer finally said to my mother, based on the documentation provided, it appears your daughter is the legitimate owner of this business. The documents your son has been using appear to be falsified. My mother's confident expression crumbled. That's impossible. Marcus has been involved in this business from the beginning. According to these records, the officer continued, Miss Rodriguez has been the sole owner and operator for 6 years. Your son's claims of partnership appear to be fraudulent, That's when my mother made her final desperate play. "She's lying," my mother screamed, pointing at me like I was a stranger. "She's stealing from the family business. Marcus is the rightful owner. Arrest her." The desperation in her voice was painful to hear. This woman who'd raised me was now demanding my arrest to protect her stepson's theft of my life's work. I handed over my keys with a smile. I said to the officers, pulling the restaurant keys from my pocket and setting them on the desk. "If my family believes Marcus is the rightful owner, he's welcome to try running the business." "Miss Rodriguez," the second officer said, "are you voluntarily relinquishing access to the business?" "I'm allowing my family to discover what happens when someone who's never run a restaurant tries to operate 5 of them," I replied. What happened next was exactly what I'd expected. Within 30 minutes of my departure, Elizabeth arrived with 2 associates, a court stenographer, and enough legal documentation to fill a briefcase. "Mrs. Martinez," Elizabeth addressed my mother formally, "you've just forced the rightful owner of these businesses to surrender access based on fraudulent documents. Your son is now attempting to operate restaurants he doesn't legally own, using systems he doesn't understand." The legal implications hit my family like an avalanche. Not only had Marcus committed fraud with the forged documents, but my mother had now used those fraudulent documents to force me out of my own business. "We can work this out," Richard said, his voice shaking as he realized their legal exposure. "This is just a family misunderstanding." "This stopped being a family misunderstanding when you called the police to have me arrested for protecting my own business," I replied. Elizabeth spread her own documents across the table. Lawsuits for fraud, interference with business operations, and defamation. Cease and desist orders preventing Marcus from representing himself as a business owner. Asset protection orders securing my accounts and properties. Your son has 72 hours to return all materials related to these businesses and sign acknowledgments that he has no ownership interest, Elizabeth told my family. After that, we proceed with criminal and civil litigation. The room fell silent except for the sound of Marcus crying. Not tears of remorse, but tears of someone who just realized his theft hadn't worked. 3 days later, Marcus returned all forged documents, signed the acknowledgments, and agreed to never represent himself as having any connection to my businesses. My mother and Richard hired their own attorney, but the evidence of fraud was overwhelming. 6 months later, the legal issues have been resolved, but the family relationships are permanently damaged. My mother still believes I was selfish for refusing to share my success with Marcus. Richard maintains that I destroyed the family by choosing money over loyalty. They don't understand that this was never about money. It was about the principle that success belongs to the people who earn it, not the people who claim it. It was about refusing to let anyone steal 6 years of my life because they thought they deserved the results without doing the work. Rosa's authentic Mexican food is more successful than ever. Without Marcus's interference, we've completed the expansion into Tucson and Flagstaff. The national television appearance led to franchise opportunities across the Southwest. Abuela and I opened a culinary school where we teach both traditional Mexican cooking and modern restaurant management. Marcus never started his own restaurant. Last I heard, he was selling insurance for his father, still talking about entrepreneurial ideas, but never implementing them. My mother sends birthday cards with notes about how she hopes we can put this behind us and rebuild our family relationship. She still doesn't understand that families aren't rebuilt by ignoring theft. They're rebuilt by acknowledging it and making amends. The handcuffs she demanded for my wrists never materialized, but the truth did. Sometimes the best thing your family can do for you is show you exactly who they are so you can decide exactly who you want to be. I chose to be someone who builds rather than steals, who earns rather than claims, who protects what matters rather than surrendering it for false peace. The keys I handed over that day were returned within hours, but I kept something more valuable. The knowledge that my success was real, earned, and mine to protect. And no one, not even family, will ever take that away again. The scent of my mother's signature biryani wafted through our family home, but tonight it didn't bring the usual comfort. I sat at the kitchen counter staring at my laptop screen, double-checking the numbers I'd spent months researching. Behind me, Mom slammed cabinet doors with increasing force, her passive-aggressive way of showing disapproval. "Sophia," she said, stirring the pot with more vigor than necessary. $200,000. Your entire savings. For what? Empty desert land in the middle of nowhere. I took a deep breath. Mom, it's not nowhere. It's strategically located. Located? She scoffed. There's nothing there but dust and cacti. Meanwhile, your brother's wedding is not my responsibility, I finished quietly, though my heart raced. The words felt like betrayal even as I said them. Mom set down her spoon with a clang. Family is responsibility, Sophia. Always. Your father and I didn't raise you to be so selfish. The front door opened and I heard multiple voices. Dad, my brother Adam, and his fiancée Melissa. Perfect timing. The family tribunal was about to begin. There she is, Adam announced, his voice carrying that fake cheerfulness he'd perfected since getting engaged. My favorite sister, still obsessing over her desert dreams instead of helping with wedding plans? I closed my laptop slowly, buying time to compose myself. The land acquisition documents were sitting in my email, waiting for my final signature. Just 24 more hours and the deal would be mine. 160 acres of prime location desert property that nobody else seemed to understand the value of. Yet, Adam, I started, I've already explained. That you're abandoning your only brother? Melissa cut in, her designer handbag swinging accusingly. Do you know how embarrassing it is to tell people that my future sister-in-law won't even contribute to our special day? My father, who'd been quietly hanging up his coat, finally spoke. Sophia, we need to talk about this. Family meeting. Now. I followed them into the living room, my laptop clutched to my chest like armor. The same room where we'd celebrated birthdays, holidays, Adam's engagement. Now it felt like a courtroom and I was the defendant. Dad settled into his leather recliner, the one he'd bought after making partner at his law firm. Show me these investment documents everyone's talking about. I opened my laptop, pulled up the satellite maps, the development plans, the infrastructure proposals. Look, the state is planning major development in this corridor. There are signs that big tech companies are. Speculation, Dad interrupted. All of it. You're gambling your entire savings on rumors and hunches while your brother needs real support for his future. My future matters too, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. This land, it's not just dirt. It's potential. The kind of opportunity that comes once in a lifetime. Adam laughed, but it wasn't kind. Once in a lifetime? Sophia, you sound like those crypto bros who lost everything. This is worse than when you tried to convince us to invest in Amazon stock in 2005. And I was right then, wasn't I? I shot back. If you'd listened, if any of you had listened. Enough. Mom's voice cracked through the room. This isn't about stocks or land or money. This is about family. About priorities. I looked around the room at these people I loved who'd supported me through so much, now united in their certainty that I was making a massive mistake. But they hadn't done the research. Hadn't spent months analyzing development patterns, tracking permit applications, following the breadcrumbs that major tech companies left when they were planning expansions. The wedding venue alone is $80,000, Melissa said, her voice dripping with accusation. Your share would have made such a difference. But instead you're throwing it away on empty desert. I stood up, my hands shaking but my voice steady. I'm not throwing anything away. I'm investing in my future. And I'm not responsible for funding your wedding. The room went silent. Even the usual neighborhood sounds seemed to stop. Dad's face darkened, the same look he got when dealing with difficult clients. If you do this, he said slowly, if you choose this foolish investment over supporting your brother's wedding, don't expect to be welcome at that wedding. Or in this house. My heart stopped. Dad. He's right, Adam jumped in. You want to act like you're not part of this family? Fine. Be that way. Mom started crying, soft hiccuping sobs that felt like physical blows. How did we raise such a selfish daughter? I looked at each of them, these people who shaped my life, who taught me to think for myself, to work hard, to follow my dreams, now demanding I abandon those very principles. I'm not being selfish, I said quietly. I'm being smart. And one day you'll see that. Out. Dad's voice was cold. Take your laptop, take your desert dreams and get out. When you come to your senses, when you're ready to be part of this family again, maybe we'll talk. I packed my laptop with trembling hands, walked to the door on legs that felt like lead. Behind me, Melissa was already whispering about replanning the wedding without me. Mom's sobs had gotten louder. Adam wouldn't even look at me. That desert plot is worthless. Dad's voice followed me out. You're throwing away everything, your family, your future, for worthless dirt. I got into my car, hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Through the windshield I could see my childhood bedroom window, where I'd spent countless nights studying market trends, learning to analyze opportunities, building the skills that led me to this moment. My phone buzzed, the land acquisition documents ready for final signature. With tears blurring my vision, I signed electronically, watching as my entire savings transformed into 160 acres of desert land that only I seemed to believe in. That night in my small apartment I spread out all my research across the floor. Satellite images, development proposals, infrastructure plans. I wasn't crazy. The signs were there for anyone willing to look closely enough. Major tech companies had been quietly buying up land through shell corporations. The state had approved preliminary plans for massive water and power expansions in the area. Something big was coming. I just had to hold on long enough to prove it. The next few weeks passed in a blur of silence. No calls from Mom, no texts from Adam, not even angry emails from Dad. Just complete radio silence, broken only by social media updates about wedding preparations I was no longer part of. I threw myself into work, tracking every development in the area, following up on every rumor, every permit application. My tiny apartment became a command center of maps and documents. Sometimes late at night doubt would creep in. What if they were right? What if I'd thrown away everything for nothing? But then I'd review my research, double-check my calculations, and the certainty would return. The patterns were there. The signs were clear. I just needed time. It came exactly 11 weeks after my family threw me out. I was at work reviewing property assessments for my real estate firm, when my phone started buzzing. News alerts, text messages, emails, all saying the same thing. Tesla announces new gigafactory location. My hands shook as I opened the press release. There it was, in black and white, the exact corridor I'd invested in. My land wasn't just in the development zone. It was dead center in the planned campus. Within hours my phone was exploding with calls. Real estate developers, investment firms, and yes, Tesla's corporate office. But the calls I waited for, the ones from my family, didn't come. Not that day anyway. I sat in my apartment that night, surrounded by the research that had cost me my family but had just made me a multimillionaire on paper. The same documents they'd called worthless were now worth more than they could imagine. My phone buzzed again. Another offer higher than the last. But I wasn't ready to sell. Not yet. Because this wasn't just about money anymore. This was about vindication. About proving that sometimes, being called crazy by everyone you love doesn't mean you're wrong. It just means you can see something they can't. The morning after Tesla's announcement, I woke up to 78 missed calls. Real estate agents, developers, investors, and buried among them 3 from my mother, 2 from Adam, and 1 from Dad. I ignored them all. Instead, I made coffee and opened my laptop to find my inbox flooded. Subject lines screamed, urgent offer, and immediate purchase opportunity. The most interesting email came from Tesla's acquisition team, requesting a meeting to discuss my property. My phone buzzed again. Sophia. Her voice was small, uncertain. We saw the news. Did you? I kept my voice neutral, years of negotiating real estate deals finally paying off in personal life. Your father. We didn't understand. No, I said quietly. You didn't try to understand. Silence stretched between us, heavy with 3 months of absence. The wedding is next week, she finally said. Maybe you could. I have meetings, I cut her off. With Tesla's corporate team. About my worthless desert plot. I ended the call before she could respond. My hands were shaking, but not from anger. From power. For the first time in my life I held all the cards. The Tesla meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. at their temporary offices downtown. I chose my outfit carefully, charcoal gray suit, minimal jewelry, hair pulled back. Professional, not desperate. Confident, not arrogant. Ms. Harrison, their lead negotiator, James Wilson, greeted me with practiced warmth. We're very interested in your property. I imagine you are, I replied, taking my seat at the conference table. Given that it's central to your planned campus. He smiled, sliding a document across the table. We'd like to make an offer. I glanced at the number and kept my face carefully neutral, though my heart skipped. It was 8 times what I'd paid 3 months ago. That's an interesting starting point, I said, closing the folder. Wilson's smile faltered slightly. Starting point. Mr. Wilson, we both know this property is essential to your timeline. You've already announced the location. Permits are being filed. Construction crews are being contracted. Delays would be costly. His expression shifted. Now he was really seeing me not just a lucky investor but someone who'd done their homework. What are you proposing? I pulled out my own folder. I have 3 other offers from developers. I also have preliminary approval for my own development plan. A bluff but a calculated one. I'm happy to work with Tesla, but it needs to make sense for my investors. Investors? He raised an eyebrow. A figure of speech, I smiled. Though I do have several interested parties. The dance continued for hours. Numbers were discussed, terms negotiated, conditions debated. By the time I left the building, the sun was setting and I had a letter of intent for a deal worth nearly 12 times my initial investment. My phone had been silently buzzing in my bag throughout the meeting. I finally checked it in my car. Dad, we need to talk. Adam, you could have told us what you knew. Melissa, this doesn't change anything about the wedding. Mom, please come home. Please. I started my car, but instead of heading to my apartment, I found myself driving to our family home. The same home I'd been thrown out of 3 months ago. Dad's car was in the driveway, along with Adam's new BMW. Before I could change my mind, the front door opened. Mom stood there looking smaller than I remembered. I saw your car, she said softly. Please come in. The living room was exactly as I'd left it that night, down to the real estate documents still scattered on the coffee table. Dad sat in his recliner, but he wasn't relaxed. Adam and Melissa sat on the couch, her engagement ring catching the light as she fidgeted. So, Dad cleared his throat. Tesla. Yes, I said, remaining standing. Tesla. Why didn't you tell us? Adam burst out. You knew they were coming. You knew and you kept it secret while we all thought you were crazy. I looked at him incredulously. I tried to tell you. I showed you all my research. You didn't want to listen. Because it seemed impossible. Dad said. Desert land? No development? No infrastructure? No vision, I corrected. No trust in me. No respect for my judgment. Melissa stood up suddenly. This doesn't change anything about the wedding. We've replanned everything without your contribution. We don't need your money now. I laughed and the sound surprised even me. You never needed my money. You wanted my submission. My obedience to family expectations. Well, congratulations. You got what you wanted, a wedding without your crazy sister-in-law. Sophia, Mom pleaded. We're still family. Are we? I turned to her. Because family trusts each other. Family listens. Family doesn't throw you out for believing in yourself. Dad stood up, lawyer mode engaged. We were worried about you. Making such a huge investment with no guaranteed return. Stop. My voice was quiet but firm. You weren't worried about me. You were angry that I wouldn't conform. That I dared to have a vision beyond what you could see. And now you're rich, Adam said bitterly. Is that what you came to tell us? To rub it in? I pulled out my phone and showed them the Tesla offer. The number made Mom gasp and Dad sink back into his chair. I came to show you what believing in myself looks like, I said. What trusting my judgment got me. Not to get back into the wedding, not to repair what you broke, but to make sure you understand exactly what you dismissed. Melissa grabbed her bag. This is ridiculous. Adam, we're leaving. But Adam was staring at the number on my phone, his face pale. That's more than our entire wedding budget. More than my annual salary. More than you thought your sister was worth? I finished for him. The room fell silent. Outside, a car drove past, its headlights sweeping across the family photos on the wall, happy moments frozen in time, before dreams of desert land and wedding expectations tore us apart. What do you want? Dad finally asked. To punish us? To make us feel foolish? I looked at each of them in turn. The family that had shaped me, supported me, then abandoned me when I needed them most. I want you to remember this moment, I said quietly. The next time someone shows you a dream you can't understand, remember the daughter you threw away for believing in herself. Remember what it cost you. Cost us. Mom's voice cracked. Sophia, please. We can fix this. Come to the wedding. Be part of the family again. I walked to the door, then turned back one last time. The family that threw me out doesn't get to celebrate my success. You can't dismiss me one day and claim me the next. That's not how this works. As I drove away, my phone started buzzing again. More calls, more messages, more pleas. But I felt lighter somehow. Vindication, I was learning, didn't always bring reconciliation. Sometimes it just brought clarity. The next morning, I signed the Tesla deal. The day I signed the Tesla contract, I bought myself a house. Not a mansion or anything flashy, just a modern 3-bedroom home with large windows and a small garden. The kind of place where desert flowers could bloom if given enough care. It was exactly 1 week before Adam's wedding. The media coverage of Tesla's land acquisition had made me something of a local legend. Woman's desert gamble pays off, read one headline. Family rejects daughter's investment, loses millions, declared another. I hadn't given any interviews, but people talked. In a city this size, stories spread. I was in my new home office, reviewing plans for a sustainable technology investment fund I was starting, when my phone lit up with a familiar number. Dad's law firm. Ms. Harrison? His secretary's voice was professional. Your father would like to schedule a meeting to discuss potential investment opportunities. I almost laughed. Tell Mr. Harrison I'm not taking new clients at this time. He said you might say that. He also asked me to remind you that family isn't always about business. I finished. Funny how that works both ways. After hanging up, I walked to my garden. The desert marigolds I'd planted were starting to bloom, tough little flowers that thrived in harsh conditions. Kind of like me. My doorbell rang. Through the security camera, I saw Mom holding what looked like a wedding invitation. I opened the door but didn't invite her in. You look well, she said, taking in my appearance. Success suits you. What do you want, Mom? She held out the invitation. It's not too late to be part of the wedding. He misses you. We all do. Missing someone you threw away isn't the same as respecting them, I replied. We were wrong, she admitted, and I saw tears forming in her eyes. So wrong. But you're still family. I took the invitation but didn't open it. Family isn't something you can switch on and off when it's convenient. You can't disown me when I don't meet your expectations, then claim me when I exceed them. What can we do, she asked quietly, to make this right? I looked at her, really looked at her, the mother who taught me to be strong, to think for myself, then punished me for doing exactly that. You can't make it right, I said. But you can learn from it. Start by asking yourself why you were so quick to dismiss my judgment. Why conformity was more important than supporting my dreams. She wiped her eyes. Your father, he's struggling with this. With being so wrong. Dad's struggling with his ego, I corrected. With the fact that his foolish daughter proved him wrong in such a public way. He's trying to reach out. Through his secretary? With business proposals. I shook my head. That's not reaching out, Mom. That's trying to capitalize on my success. The wedding invitation felt heavy in my hand. I finally opened it. Inside was a handwritten note from Adam. I was wrong. I'm sorry. Please come. Mom watched me read it. He means it. I'm sure he does, I said. Now, after Tesla. After the media coverage. After I proved my worth in terms he can understand. You're angry, she observed. No, I replied, surprising myself with the truth of it. I'm not angry anymore. I'm just different. Success didn't change me, having to stand alone did. I handed the invitation back to her. I won't be attending the wedding. Not because I'm holding a grudge, but because that chapter of our family dynamic is over. The daughter who would have set aside her own dreams to make everyone else comfortable doesn't exist anymore. And what about the future? She asked, her voice small. Will you shut us out forever? I gestured to my garden. See those flowers? They're desert flowers. They don't need constant attention or perfect conditions. They just need space to grow on their own terms. That's what I need too. Space doesn't mean forever, she said. No, I agreed. But it means until I'm ready. Until this success isn't the reason for reconciliation. Until the family understands that loving someone means supporting their dreams, even when those dreams look like empty desert to you. After she left, I sat in my garden watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. My phone buzzed with another news alert: Tesla breaking ground on their new facility. The ceremony would be next month. I'd been invited as a special guest. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd be standing on that desert plot watching the future being built, while my family celebrated a wedding I wouldn't attend. But that's the thing about choices, they all have prices. My family chose conformity over vision. I chose belief in myself over their approval. We were all living with those choices now. A week later, on Adam's wedding day, I was in my office finalizing plans for my investment fund. The focus would be on sustainable technology and renewable energy, the kind of forward-thinking investments that others might dismiss as crazy. Just like a certain piece of desert land. My phone buzzed with a text from Adam: "Left an empty seat for you. Just in case." I replied with a picture of my blooming desert marigolds. "Some things grow better with space." He sent back a single heart emoji. Maybe that's what family would look like now, distant hearts beating in rhythm, separated by choice and consequence, but still somehow connected. Not by obligation or tradition, but by the slow understanding that love doesn't require submission, and success doesn't erase the past. I looked out at my garden, at the tough little flowers that found a way to bloom in the desert, and smiled. Sometimes the biggest victories aren't in proving others wrong, but in proving yourself right. Sometimes the greatest strength isn't in fighting for acceptance, but in being okay without it. The desert taught me that. Empty spaces aren't always worthless. Sometimes they're just waiting for the right person to see their potential, in the land, in themselves, in the future that others can't quite imagine yet. As the sun set on my brother's wedding day, I opened my laptop and started writing a book, Desert Wisdom: Finding Value in Empty Spaces. It wasn't just about real estate or investment strategy. It was about believing in yourself when no one else does. About standing alone until your vision becomes reality. Because sometimes, the most worthless things, be it desert land or dismissed dreams, turn out to be the most valuable of all. You just have to be brave enough to see it. And strong enough to stand by it. Even if you have to stand alone. The scent of bleach and stale cigarettes clung to my uniform as I dragged myself through the back entrance of my parents' house. It was Sunday night mandatory family dinner. The same ritual that had become a weekly reminder of my supposed failure. "Look who finally decided to show up," my brother James announced as I walked into the dining room. "The maid of Crystal Lake Hotel, or should I say, the maid of nowhere?" I forced a tired smile, taking my usual seat at the far end of the table. My mother shot me a look of practiced disappointment while arranging the silverware. "Emily, honey, couldn't you at least have changed out of your work clothes? We have guests." By guests she meant my brother's new fiancée Lauren and her parents, the kind of people who believed success was measured by designer labels and country club memberships. They shifted uncomfortably in their seats, trying not to stare at my wrinkled uniform. "Sorry Mom, double shift ran late," I said quietly, helping myself to the mashed potatoes. "We had a bus tour come through." James snorted. "A bus tour? At that dead hotel? What were they touring, cobwebs?" "James," Dad warned half-heartedly, not looking up from his phone. But I could see the corner of his mouth twitch with amusement. "No, really," James continued, warming to his audience. "I drove by there last week. Place looks like something out of a horror movie. What was it, 3 rooms booked? 4. Lauren's father cleared his throat. "Crystal Lake. Isn't that the old resort property out by the state park? Been closed for what, 20 years? 15. I corrected automatically. And we're not closed. We're operating at reduced capacity while While what?" James interrupted. "While you waste your business degree cleaning toilets. Real smart investment there, sis." The room fell quiet except for the clink of silverware. They were waiting for me to defend myself, to explain why I'd spent my entire inheritance from Grandma, all $180,000, buying a rundown hotel in a forgotten tourist town. Why I'd taken a job as a maid there instead of accepting the corporate position James had lined up for me at his firm. But I just kept eating. "I just don't understand," Mom finally said, her voice tight with familiar disappointment. "You had such potential. A degree from Northwestern. Outstanding recommendations. You could have been running a real hotel by now, not this." "Actually," I said carefully, setting down my fork, "I have some news about the hotel." James's eyes lit up with mock excitement. "Oh, please tell me you're finally selling that money pit." I know a developer who might take it off your hands. For the land value at least. I reached into my bag and pulled out a thick manila envelope, sliding it across the table. You're right about one thing. I am selling. Dad finally looked up from his phone. About time you came to your senses. How much are you losing on it? I kept my face neutral as James snatched up the envelope, probably expecting to see some lowball offer from a desperate buyer. But as he scanned the first page, his smug expression faltered. This has to be a joke, he stammered. What is it? Mom asked, leaning forward. James looked at me, then back at the papers. It's a purchase agreement. From Hilton Hotels Corporation. Now I had everyone's attention. Hilton. Lauren's father straightened in his chair. The Hilton. For how much? Dad demanded. I took a slow sip of water before answering. $50 million. Plus performance incentives over the next 5 years. The silence that followed was deafening. That's impossible, James finally managed. Why would Hilton want that worthless property? Because, I said quietly, it's not worthless. Never was. The hotel sits on 200 acres of pristine lakefront property. Direct access to the state park. Protected views. Private beach. Natural springs. And most importantly, it's the only commercially zoned resort property within 100 miles of 3 major cities. I pulled out my phone and pulled up the renderings Hilton's architects had created. They're planning a 300-room luxury resort and conference center. Spa golf course marina. Breaking ground next spring. Mom's hand trembled as she reached for the images. But how did you know? When you bought it? I did my research, I said simply. Spent 6 months analyzing tourism data, development trends, zoning regulations. The previous owners went bankrupt because they were trying to run it as a budget hotel. They never saw its real potential. So why work as a maid? Lauren asked, speaking for the first time. If you knew all this. I smiled. Because I needed to learn everything about the property. Every creaky floorboard. Every maintenance issue. Every staffing challenge. I needed to understand it from the ground up before I could pitch it to major investors. The bus tours, James said slowly, realization dawning. They weren't tourists. Hotel executives. Development teams. Investors. I nodded. I've given that property tour at least 50 times in the past 2 years. Always in my uniform, always as just the maid. You'd be amazed what people reveal when they think you're invisible. Dad was frantically scrolling through his phone now, probably looking up property records and news about hotel developments in the area. Why didn't you tell us? Would you have believed me? I asked quietly. When I first bought it, you all said I was throwing my life away. Said I was naive. Stupid. Every Sunday dinner became an intervention about my poor life choices. I stood up, gathering my things. The sale closes next month. I'll be staying on as development director for the new resort. And yes, James, I'll be running a real hotel. One that I helped create. As I walked toward the door, I turned back one last time. Oh, and Mom? Sorry about the uniform. But it's the last time you'll have to be embarrassed by it. I quit that job this morning. The look on their faces as I walked out, that was better than any dessert they could have served. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings, paperwork, and increasingly desperate attempts at reconciliation from my family. My phone buzzed constantly with messages I hadn't bothered to answer. Emily, honey, we should discuss your investment strategy. Dad. Just trying to protect you from disappointment. Mom. Hey sis, about that developer friend of mine. James. I archived them all, focusing instead on the transition meetings with Hilton's development team. We were sitting in my small office at Crystal Lake. My real office, not the housekeeping closet I'd used as cover for 2 years, when my brother decided to make an unannounced appearance. Miss Bennett. My assistant Sarah poked her head in. Your brother's here. Says it's urgent. I looked up from the architectural plans spread across my desk. Marcus Chin, Hilton's lead developer, raised an eyebrow. Family situation? Not an urgent one, I replied, then nodded to Sarah. Tell him I'm in meetings all day. But James, being James, pushed past her anyway. He stopped short when he saw the room full of executives in suits. His eyes darted from the plans on the desk to the digital renderings projected on the wall. Emily, he said, trying to sound casual. Didn't realize you had company. Mr. Bennett, Marcus stood ever professional. We were just reviewing the final placement for the conference center. Your sister's insights about the property's natural features have been invaluable. James forced a smile. Yes, well, she's always been thorough. Listen, can we talk privately for a minute? We're actually in the middle of something critical, I said, not looking up from the plans. Sarah can help you schedule a time later this week. It's about the family foundation, he pressed. Dad's considering some new investment opportunities and No, I cut him off, finally meeting his eyes. Whatever pitch you're here to make, whatever angle you're trying to work, the answer is no. The room had gone uncomfortably quiet. Marcus cleared his throat. Perhaps we should take a break. Not necessary, I said firmly. James was just leaving. My brother's face flushed red. You know what? Fine. Play big shot developer all you want. But don't forget where you came from. Don't forget who helped you get your start. Now I did stand up. I start. You mean the job offers I never asked for? The constant criticism? The weekly reminders of what a disappointment I was. We were trying to help. No, I said quietly. You were trying to control me. There's a difference. James opened his mouth to argue, but I held up my hand. I have a $50 million development project to oversee. I don't have time for whatever scheme you're selling. Sarah will show you out. After he left, Marcus let out a low whistle. Family business is always complicated. I sat back down, straightening the plans he'd brought. Not anymore. Now it's just business. But of course it wasn't that simple. Never is with family. That evening, as I was doing my final walkthrough of the property, a habit I couldn't break after 2 years of actual housekeeping, I found my mother waiting in the lobby. She looked out of place among the faded grandeur of Crystal Lake's entrance, her designer handbag clutched nervously in manicured hands. Emily, please. Just hear me out. I gestured to one of the worn lobby chairs. 5 minutes. She sat carefully, as if afraid the vintage furniture might dirty her clothes. Your father and we've been doing some thinking. About the foundation's investment portfolio. Mom. Just listen, she pleaded. The family foundation has considerable resources. We could help with the development costs, become partners in Stop, I said firmly. I don't need partners. I don't need investors. And I definitely don't need the family foundation trying to claim credit for my success. That's not what this is about. Isn't it? I walked over to the front desk, pulling out the guest ledger I'd maintained meticulously for 2 years. Would you like to see how many times you or Dad visited while I was just a maid here? 0. Not once did you come to see what I was building. Not once did you ask about my plans. We were worried about you, she said softly. Living in that tiny apartment, working these horrible hours. I lived in that tiny apartment so I could put every spare dollar into renovating the core infrastructure. I worked those horrible hours so I could learn every detail about this place. I closed the ledger with a snap. And now that it's paying off, now that Hilton's involved, suddenly you're interested. Mom's eyes filled with tears. We're your family. Family would have believed in me, I replied. Or at least asked why I believed in this place so much. Just then Sarah appeared with a stack of contracts. Sorry to interrupt, but the Hilton legal team needs these reviewed before tomorrow's meeting. Thanks, Sarah. I took the papers, then turned back to my mother. I have work to do. You can see yourself out. As she walked toward the door, she paused. Your grandmother. She would be proud of you. That hit harder than I expected. Grandma had been the only one who supported my decision to buy Crystal Lake. She'd seen something in this old place that matched what I saw, not what it was, but what it could be. I know, I said quietly. That's why she left me the money to buy it. She believed in making your own path, not following someone else's. After Mom left, I sat in the lobby for a long time, surrounded by the ghosts of Crystal Lake's past glory. The grand staircase that had hosted countless wedding parties. The massive fireplace where families had gathered on cold nights. The wall of windows overlooking the lake, now cleaned to a sparkle thanks to my own hands. My phone buzzed, another message from James. Dad's furious. Says you're making a huge mistake not involving the family. Don't burn bridges you might need later. I smiled, thinking of the other envelope sitting in my desk drawer. The one I hadn't shown them yet. Because while Hilton was buying the property for $50 million, they weren't my only option. 3 other major hotel chains had made offers. And tomorrow I would start negotiating terms. Sometimes the best revenge isn't proving people wrong. It's showing them they never had any power over you in the first place. The morning of the final contract signing, I arrived early at Crystal Lake. The sun was just rising over the water, painting the old building in shades of gold and promise. I walked the grounds one last time, not as a maid or even as the owner, but as someone saying goodbye to a trusted friend. Every corner held a memory now. The back stairwell where I'd practiced my investment pitches while mopping floors. The Suite 212 where I'd first overheard Hilton executives discussing expansion plans in the area. The lakefront pavilion where I'd sketched my initial renovation concepts during lunch breaks. Taking one last look? Sarah's voice broke through my thoughts. She handed me a coffee, my usual order from the small cafe in town. Hard to believe it's really happening, I said, accepting the cup. Did the final contracts arrive? She nodded. Just delivered. But there's something else you should know. Your family's here. I froze. All of them. Your parents, your brother, his fiancée, even her parents. They're waiting in the main conference room. Of course they were. Today of all days. There's more, Sarah added hesitantly. Your father's brought Howard Sterling. Now that got my attention. Howard Sterling was one of the most prominent real estate attorneys in Chicago. He'd handled some of the biggest hotel developments in the Midwest. Let me guess, they're trying to block the sale? Sarah shook her head. Actually, they're here with a counteroffer. Sterling's representing the family foundation. They're offering $60 million. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so perfectly predictable. $10 million over Hilton's offer. They really think they can buy their way into this. What do you want me to tell them? I checked my watch. The Hilton executives wouldn't arrive for another hour. Nothing. I'll handle this myself. When I walked into the conference room, the tension was palpable. My father sat at the head of the table, Howard Sterling to his right, various family members arranged around them like pieces on a chessboard. Emily, Dad stood all business. Good of you to join us. In my own hotel. How generous of me. I set my coffee down and remained standing. I assume this isn't a social call. Sterling cleared his throat, opening his briefcase. Miss Bennett, we've prepared a very generous offer dash. Save it, I cut him off. The property's not for sale. But Hilton dash, James started. Is one of several interested parties, I finished. And none of them involve the family foundation. Dad's face reddened. We're offering $10 million over their price. This isn't about money, I said quietly. It never was. I walked to the windows overlooking the lake. 2 years ago when I bought this place you all thought I was crazy. Called it a waste of my inheritance. Said I was throwing my life away. We were wrong, Mom interjected. We see that now. No, I turned back to face them. You see dollar signs now. There's a difference. I pulled out my phone and pulled up an email reading aloud. Dear Ms. Bennett, we are impressed not just by the property's potential, but by your comprehensive understanding of its operations and your clear vision for its future. Your hands-on approach and detailed knowledge of every aspect of the hotel's functioning sets you apart from typical developers. What's that? James demanded. An email from Marriott International, I said calmly. One of 4 major hotel chains currently bidding on Crystal Lake. Hilton's offer was just the first one I showed you. The room went silent. You see, I continued, while you were all laughing at the maid cleaning rooms, I was building relationships. Learning the industry from the ground up. Creating a bidding war between the biggest names in hospitality. Sterling looked impressed despite himself. How many offers do you have? 4 firm offers ranging from $50 to $75 million. Plus 2 investment groups interested in partnerships. I smiled. But that's not even the best part. I walked to the door and nodded to Sarah, who wheeled in a presentation board covered with a cloth. The best part, I said, pulling off the cloth to reveal architectural renderings, is that every single offer includes keeping me on as executive director of development. Not just for this project, but for future expansions across their portfolios. The renderings showed not just Crystal Lake's transformation, but concepts for 3 other resort properties in different states. My name was listed prominently on each one. "You've been planning this all along?" Mom whispered. "I've been working for this all along," I corrected. "Every long shift. Every missed family dinner. Every moment you thought I was just scrubbing toilets, I was building a future. My future. Not the family's." Dad stood up, his voice tight. "Emily, be reasonable. The foundation has no place here," I finished. "I think we're done." As if on cue, Sarah appeared at the door. "Ms. Bennett? The Marriott executives have arrived early. They're asking to speak with you." I gathered my things calmly. "If you'll excuse me, I have a real meeting to attend. Sarah will show you out." "Wait," James called as I reached the door. "At least tell us which offer you're taking." I paused, then turned back with a small smile. "That's the beauty of success, James. I don't have to tell you anything." 3 months later, I stood on the balcony of my new office in the Marriott corporate headquarters, overlooking the Chicago skyline. Crystal Lake was already under renovation, its transformation from forgotten resort to luxury destination well underway. My name was on the development team for 2 other major projects, and industry magazines had started calling me hospitality's rising star. My phone buzzed, another message from Mom. "Saw the article in Forbes. We miss you at Sunday dinners." I archived it without responding. Some bridges aren't meant to be rebuilt. Sarah knocked on my door. "Your 2 o'clock is here. The development team for the Colorado Springs project." I straightened my jacket, designer now but still practical. Still ready to roll up my sleeves and get my hands dirty if needed. Because that's what real success taught me. It's not about looking the part. It's about doing the work even when no one's watching. Especially when no one's watching. "Send them in," I said, taking my seat at the head of the conference table. "And Sarah, make sure they have the updated projections. The ones that show why starting from the bottom is sometimes the best way to reach the top. Because in the end, success isn't about proving others wrong. It's about proving yourself right. And sometimes the best view comes after the longest climb." My name is Samantha Brooks, and at 29, I discovered that my entire family had conspired to kill me for my life insurance policy. Standing on a hillside overlooking St. Mary's Cemetery, watching my own funeral procession, I realized that the people who raised me valued me at exactly $2 million. Dead. The Brooks family had always been obsessed with money, though we'd never had much of it. My father, William Brooks, was a small-town insurance salesman in Cedar Falls, Iowa, who spent 40 years watching other people get rich while he struggled to make ends meet. My mother, Patricia, worked as a bank teller and knew exactly how much money everyone in town had, and how much they didn't. My older brother Kevin was a mechanic who'd inherited Dad's resentment about never having enough money. My younger sister Ashley had expensive tastes and no realistic plan for affording them. Together they formed a family unit united by financial frustration and a shared belief that the world owed them more than they had. I was different. Maybe because I'd been fortunate enough to receive an academic scholarship to Iowa State University, I'd seen a world beyond Cedar Falls' financial limitations. I studied computer science, landed a well-paying job at a tech company in Des Moines, and built a life based on my own achievements rather than resentment about what I lacked. This difference made me both valuable and resented within my family. Valuable because I could help them financially when they needed it. Resented because my success highlighted their failures and made them feel inadequate by comparison. The life insurance policy that would eventually motivate them to murder me had been purchased 5 years ago as part of a benefits package at my company. As a single 24-year-old with no dependents, I designated my parents as beneficiaries without much thought. It seemed like a standard precaution. Who expects to die young and single? The policy was substantial. $2 million in coverage designed to attract talented young professionals to the company. I'd mentioned it to my family in passing, thinking they'd be reassured to know I was financially responsible. I had no idea I was signing my own death warrant. The first sign that something was wrong came 18 months ago when my family's financial pressures reached a crisis point. Dad's insurance agency was failing due to competition from online providers. Mom had been laid off from the bank during a merger. Kevin's auto repair shop was struggling because newer cars required specialized equipment he couldn't afford. Ashley had accumulated $40,000 in credit card debt pursuing an Instagram influencer lifestyle she couldn't sustain. During a family dinner, they presented their problems to me as a collective crisis requiring my intervention. "We need help, Samantha," Dad said, sliding a stack of bills across the dining room table. "The business is failing, your mother's unemployed, and we're about to lose the house." I studied the numbers. Mortgage payments, credit card bills, business loans, and Ashley's shopping debts. The total was staggering, nearly $180,000 in combined family debt. "I can help with some of this," I offered, calculating what I could afford from my savings. "Maybe $25,000 to get you caught up on the mortgage and—" "25,000? Kevin interrupted, laughing bitterly. "That's nothing compared to what we need. You make more in 6 months than any of us make in 2 years. Mom leaned forward, her expression manipulative in a way I'd learned to recognize. "Honey, you know we've always supported your success. When you wanted to go to college, we encouraged you even though we couldn't afford to help. When you moved away for that job, we were proud even though it meant losing you. And now we need our family to support us," Ashley added. "Just like we supported you." I felt the familiar weight of family guilt settling over me, but something about their presentation felt orchestrated. The way they'd coordinated their talking points, the specific dollar amounts they'd prepared, the emotional manipulation. It felt more like a business presentation than a genuine cry for help. "I'll think about what I can do," I said finally. "But I can't solve everyone's financial problems. You each need to make some difficult decisions about spending and debt management." The disappointment in their faces quickly shifted to something colder. I realized they hadn't come to me for help. They'd come expecting a complete financial bailout, and my offer of partial assistance was being interpreted as rejection. Over the following months, their requests for money became more frequent and more aggressive. Dad needed cash to keep his business afloat, just until things turned around. Mom required help with medical bills from a procedure she claimed was urgent but wouldn't discuss in detail. Kevin's shop faced bankruptcy unless I invested in new equipment. Ashley's debt was growing due to interest charges and late fees. Each time I provided what help I could afford, $5,000 here, $3,000 there, but it was never enough to solve their underlying problems. More concerning was their growing resentment when I couldn't provide everything they wanted. "It must be nice to have so much money that you can pick and choose who deserves help," Ashley said during one particularly tense conversation. "Some of us weren't lucky enough to be born smart enough for college scholarships." "You could have applied for scholarships too," I pointed out. "You chose to drop out of high school instead." "Not everyone gets to be the perfect daughter who can do no wrong," she shot back. These family tensions escalated when I started dating Marcus, a software engineer who shared my career focus and financial responsibility. My family immediately viewed him as a threat, not to me but to their access to my money. "He's changing you," Mom complained after Marcus and I had been dating for 6 months. "You're becoming selfish and materialistic just like him." What they really meant was that Marcus encouraged me to set boundaries around my family's financial demands. He'd grown up in a healthy family dynamic and was shocked by the way my relatives treated me like a personal A-team. "Sam, you're not responsible for solving your family's financial problems," he said after a particularly draining dinner where they'd spent 2 hours detailing their various crises. "They're all adults who made their own choices. You can help them occasionally, but you shouldn't be expected to fund their lifestyles." Marcus's perspective gave me the courage to start saying no to some of their requests. When Dad asked for $15,000 to save his business, I offered to help him develop a realistic business plan instead. When Ashley wanted me to pay off her credit cards, I suggested debt counseling services. When Kevin needed new equipment, I recommended business loans and equipment financing. These alternative suggestions were met with anger and accusations that I was abandoning my family in their time of need. "We raised you," Dad said during one heated argument. "We sacrificed for your education and your success. Now that we need help, you're too good for us." "I've given you over $40,000 in the past year," I replied. "That's not abandonment, that's significant financial support. But I can't bankrupt myself to solve problems that require fundamental changes in your spending and business practices." That argument marked a turning point in our relationship. My family stopped asking for help and started treating me with cold politeness during my visits home. They made subtle comments about my selfishness and my boyfriend's bad influence. They began excluding me from family gatherings and conversations, claiming they didn't want to burden me with their problems since I clearly had more important things to worry about. What I didn't realize was that they had moved past asking for my money to planning for my death. The insurance fraud scheme began taking shape about a year ago, though I wouldn't discover the evidence until much later. It started with seemingly innocent questions about my work life, my travel plans, and my health insurance coverage. "How's your job security?" Mom would ask during phone calls. "I worry about you young people in those tech companies. I hear they lay people off all the time." Dad started making comments about my life insurance policy, claiming he was proud that I was being financially responsible. "It's smart to have good coverage at your age. You never know what might happen." Ashley began asking about my social life and whether I was planning to get married soon. "If something happened to you, would Marcus inherit everything? Or would it still go to family?" I interpreted these questions as normal family concern, not reconnaissance for a murder plot. The first concrete step in their plan was Kevin's suggestion that I join him on a brother-sister bonding camping trip to Devil's Lake in Wisconsin. Kevin had never shown interest in bonding with me before, but he claimed he wanted to repair our relationship and get away from the stress of his financial problems. "Just the two of us," he insisted. "Like when we were kids. We can hike, fish, and actually talk without all the family drama getting in the way." I was touched by what seemed like a genuine attempt to reconnect, so I agreed to the trip despite my busy work schedule. What I didn't know was that Kevin had spent weeks researching the area, looking for remote locations where a staged accident would be plausible. Devil's Lake had dangerous cliff areas, deep water, and enough wilderness that a body might never be recovered. The trip was planned for a weekend in early October when the weather would be unpredictable and hiking conditions potentially treacherous. Kevin had researched local emergency response times and knew that help would be slow to arrive if someone were to have an accident. 2 days before our planned departure, I was working late at the office when I received a call from Ashley, sobbing hysterically. "Sam, it's Kevin," she cried. "He's been in an accident. He's in the hospital and it's really bad." My heart stopped. Despite our recent family tensions, Kevin was still my brother. "What happened?" "Which hospital?" "Cedar Falls General. Please come now. The doctors say it might be too late." I dropped everything and drove the 3 hours to Cedar Falls, arriving at the hospital around midnight. I found Ashley and my parents in the ICU waiting room, all looking devastated. "How is he?" I asked immediately. Dad looked up with red-rimmed eyes. "Car accident on Highway 20. Drunk driver hit him head-on. He's been in surgery for 6 hours." For the next 3 days I stayed at the hospital while Kevin fought for his life. The doctors said his injuries were severe. Multiple fractures, internal bleeding, brain trauma. The family gathered around his bedside, taking turns holding his hand and telling him to fight. During this vigil, something strange happened. My family's attitude toward me completely changed. The coldness and resentment that had characterized our recent interactions disappeared, replaced by desperate neediness and affection. "I'm so glad you're here," Mom said, hugging me tightly. "I don't know what we'd do without you. You're the strong one in this family." "We've been terrible to you lately," Dad admitted. "We were so focused on our problems that we forgot what really matters. Family is everything." Ashley was the most dramatic in her transformation. "Sam, I need you to know that I love you so much. You're the best sister anyone could have. If something happens to Kevin, you're all I have left." Their sudden affection felt genuine, and I was moved by what seemed like a family crisis bringing us closer together. I took emergency leave from work to stay in Cedar Falls and support them through Kevin's recovery. Kevin survived the surgery and slowly began to improve, though his recovery would take months. During this time, I found myself naturally taking on the role of family coordinator, managing his medical care, communicating with insurance companies, and helping my parents navigate the crisis. "Thank God for you," Mom said repeatedly. "I don't know how we'd handle this without your education and your ability to understand all these medical and insurance matters." What I didn't realize was that Kevin's accident, which was real, had given my family the perfect cover story for their insurance fraud scheme. They had learned during his hospitalization exactly how insurance investigations worked, what kind of documentation was required for death benefits, and how accidental deaths were processed differently from natural deaths. More importantly, they had observed my response to family crisis and realized I would drop everything to support them when they needed me. This information became crucial to their planning. Kevin's accident had also created genuine financial stress that made their need for money more urgent. His medical bills were substantial, his business had failed during his hospitalization, and the family's collective debt had grown even larger. My $2 million life insurance policy now looked like the only solution to their financial problems. The planning intensified once Kevin was released from the hospital in December. He was still recovering but mobile enough to participate in family discussions about their financial future. During one of these conversations, someone, I was never able to determine who, first suggested that my death would solve all their problems. According to later evidence I discovered, they initially considered making my death look like a suicide, playing up the stress I was supposedly feeling about their family crisis and my demanding job. But Dad's insurance background made him realize that suicide investigations were thorough and that the policy might not pay out if they couldn't prove my mental state was compromised. They settled on staging an accident instead. The camping trip Kevin had originally proposed was revived, but now with sinister intent. They would arrange for me to have a hiking accident at Devil's Lake, with Kevin as the sole witness to testify that I had fallen from a cliff while taking photos. The plan required Kevin to have recovered enough to be believable as a hiking companion, but not so recovered that his own physical limitations would be questioned if he claimed he couldn't rescue me. His recent hospitalization would also explain why he might be slower to seek help. He was still dealing with his own trauma and injuries. What made their plan particularly clever was that my death would solve multiple problems simultaneously. The life insurance payout would cover all their debts and provide substantial money for their futures. Kevin's medical bills would be paid. Dad could restart his business. Ashley could continue her lifestyle without accumulating more debt. From their perspective, sacrificing one family member to save 4 others was a reasonable trade-off. The final piece of their scheme involved creating the appearance of a close, loving family so that my death would generate maximum sympathy and minimal suspicion. They began inviting me to family gatherings again, expressing gratitude for my support during Kevin's crisis, and making sure our social media accounts showed a happy, united family. "Let's take a family photo," Ashley insisted during one dinner. "We need to document this time when we're all together and Kevin's recovering. These moments are precious." She posted the photo on Instagram with a caption about family love and support, creating digital evidence of our supposed closeness. Similar posts appeared on all their social media accounts, painting a picture of a tight-knit family that loved and supported each other. This social media campaign would serve 2 purposes. First, it would make my eventual death seem more tragic and unexpected, generating sympathy for my grieving family. Second, it would provide evidence that I was emotionally stable and happy, making suicide seem unlikely and accidental death the most plausible explanation. The camping trip was rescheduled for late February, ostensibly to celebrate Kevin's recovery and my dedication to the family during the crisis. Kevin claimed he wanted to prove to himself that he could still enjoy outdoor activities despite his injuries. "This trip means everything to me," he told me earnestly. "After being stuck in a hospital bed for months, I need to feel alive again. And I want to do it with my sister who saved my life by being there for me." I was touched by his apparent gratitude and agreed to the trip, even though February weather in Wisconsin would be harsh and potentially dangerous. Kevin assured me he had researched the conditions and found trails that would be safe for someone in his condition. What he had actually researched was how to stage my death and remove my body so it would never be found. The trip was planned for a 3-day weekend when the weather forecast predicted snow and cold temperatures, conditions that would limit the number of other hikers in the area and provide an explanation for why an accident might not be discovered immediately. I took Friday off work and drove to Cedar Falls Thursday evening, planning to leave early Friday morning for the 4-hour drive to Devil's Lake. The family gathered for dinner to send us off, and everyone was unusually emotional about what should have been a routine camping trip. "Be careful out there," Mom said, hugging me tightly. "Come back safe." Dad shook Kevin's hand solemnly. "Take care of your sister. She's precious to all of us." Ashley gave me a long hug and whispered, "I love you so much, Sam. You're the best person I know." Their excessive emotion should have been a red flag, but I interpreted it as lingering trauma from Kevin's accident, making them more aware of how quickly tragedy could strike. What I didn't know was that they were saying goodbye to me for the last time. Early Friday morning, Kevin and I loaded our gear into his truck and began the drive to Devil's Lake State Park. Kevin seemed nervous during the drive, making awkward conversation about the weather and repeatedly checking his phone. "Everything okay?" I asked. "You seem anxious." "Just excited," he replied. "And a little nervous about hiking again after the accident. But the doctors said physical activity would be good for my recovery." We arrived at the park around noon and checked into our campsite. The weather was cold but clear and there were few other visitors due to the season. Kevin immediately began discussing our hiking plans for the afternoon. "I want to show you the viewpoint at the South Shore," he said, pointing to a trail map. "The views are incredible and it's not too strenuous for someone in my condition." What he didn't mention was that the South Shore Trail included several cliff areas where a fall would be fatal, and the remote location would give him time to stage the scene before seeking help. As we prepared to begin the hike that was supposed to end my life, I had no idea that my brother was planning to push me off a cliff and tell everyone I had slipped while taking photos. But sometimes the best-laid plans encounter unexpected complications. And Kevin was about to discover that killing your sister is more difficult than it appears in the planning stages. The discovery that my family was planning to kill me came not through dramatic confrontation, but through a carelessly unlocked phone and a bathroom break that changed everything. We had been hiking for about an hour when Kevin claimed he needed to rest due to lingering effects from his accident. We stopped at a scenic overlook and Kevin sat heavily on a fallen log, breathing harder than the moderate trail should have warranted. "I need a few minutes," he said, pulling out his phone. "And I should probably check in with Mom to let her know we made it safely." I walked a short distance away to give him privacy for the call, taking photos of the lake below. The view was spectacular, deep blue water surrounded by snow-dusted cliffs and winter bare trees. It would have been a perfect day for hiking if not for the underlying tension I was beginning to sense in Kevin's behavior. After about 10 minutes, Kevin announced he needed to find a bathroom, though we were miles from any facilities. "I'll be back in a few minutes," he said, heading into the woods. "Wait here, don't wander off." He left his phone on the log where he'd been sitting. The screen was still active, showing the end of a text conversation. I wasn't intending to snoop, but a message preview caught my eye that made my blood run cold. "Supposed to happen at the cliff viewpoint. Make sure she's close enough to the edge when you..." The message was cut off, but what I could see was enough to make me realize something was terribly wrong. I quickly picked up Kevin's phone and scrolled through the conversation thread. What I found was a detailed discussion between Kevin, Ashley, and my parents about the logistics of my murder, planned for later that afternoon at a specific cliff location on our hiking route. "Ashley, weather is perfect. Cloudy enough that visibility will be limited for other hikers. Dad, Kevin, remember, you need to be far enough away when she falls that you can claim you couldn't reach her in time. Mom, the story is that she was taking photos and slipped. Kevin tried to grab her but couldn't because of his injuries from the accident. Kevin, I know the plan. She'll be at the edge getting pictures of the lake. One push and it's over. Ashley, how long before you call 911? Kevin, at least 30 minutes. Need time to mess up the scene, make it look like I tried to climb down to reach her. Dad, and you'll be too upset to think clearly about the timeline. Trauma from watching your sister die. Mom, the insurance company will expedite the claim because of the tragic circumstances. We should have the money within 60 days. I felt physically sick reading their casual discussion of my murder. These people had raised me, claimed to love me, and were now coordinating my death like a business transaction. But the worst part was realizing how calculated their recent behavior had been. Kevin's bonding trip suggestion, their sudden affection during his hospitalization, the social media post showing our happy family, it had all been orchestrated to support their fraud scheme. I quickly forwarded the entire conversation thread to my own phone, then deleted the evidence of the forwarding from Kevin's message history. My hands were shaking as I heard him crashing through the underbrush, returning from his bathroom break. I positioned myself casually near the viewpoint, pretending to take photos while my mind raced through possible responses. Running wasn't an option. We were miles from the parking area and Kevin would easily catch me on the trail. Confronting him directly might provoke him to attack me immediately rather than waiting for the planned location. Instead, I decided to play along while documenting everything and looking for an opportunity to escape or get help. Ready to keep going? Kevin asked as he rejoined me, his demeanor trying for casual but betrayed by nervous energy. Absolutely, I replied, forcing enthusiasm into my voice. This place is beautiful. I can't wait to see the viewpoint you mentioned. As we continued hiking, I used my phone to discreetly take photos and record voice memos whenever Kevin was ahead of me on the trail. I documented our route, the time, and Kevin's increasingly agitated behavior as we approached the location where he planned to kill me. I also sent a carefully worded text to Marcus. Amazing hike with Kevin at Devil's Lake. About to see the cliff viewpoint he's been talking about. Weather getting cloudy, might lose cell service soon. The message served multiple purposes. It established my location and timeline, indicated I was with Kevin, and explained why I might not be reachable later. Something happened to me, Marcus would know exactly where to direct searchers. But I needed more than just a digital trail. I needed a way to survive what was coming and expose my family's conspiracy. The opportunity came when we reached the area Kevin had identified for my murder. It was exactly as described in their text messages. A scenic cliff overlook with a steep drop to the lake below, relatively isolated from main hiking trails, and positioned so that Kevin could claim he was too far away to prevent my accidental fall. This is incredible, I said, approaching the edge while Kevin positioned himself several feet behind me. The view is perfect for photos. I could sense Kevin's tension building as I moved closer to the cliff edge. According to their plan, this was the moment when he would rush forward and push me over, then spend 30 minutes staging the scene before calling for help. But I had spotted something Kevin hadn't noticed during his reconnaissance. A narrow ledge about 10 feet below the cliff edge, hidden from above but visible if you knew where to look. If I could time my fall correctly, I might be able to catch that ledge instead of plummeting to the lake below. Kevin, come look at this, I called, pretending to spot something interesting. You can see the whole south shore from here. He approached cautiously, probably calculating the best angle for pushing me over. When he was about 3 feet away, I made my move. Instead of waiting for him to attack, I suddenly stumbled backward toward the edge, crying out in apparent alarm. Kevin, help. Kevin instinctively lunged forward to catch me, but I grabbed his arm and used his momentum to pull him off balance. We both tumbled toward the cliff edge, but I managed to twist away and catch the hidden ledge while Kevin continued over the edge. The irony was perfect. Kevin's own murder plan had resulted in his actual death while I survived in the exact location where he had planned to kill me. I hung on the ledge for several minutes, listening to make sure there were no sounds from below. Then I carefully climbed back up to the cliff top and assessed my situation. Kevin was dead. That much was certain from the height of the fall and the rocky shore below. I was alone in a remote area with evidence of a murder plot on Kevin's phone. And my family was expecting Kevin to return with news of my tragic accident. That's when I realized I had an opportunity not just to survive, but to expose the entire conspiracy by letting my family believe their plan had succeeded. I used Kevin's phone to send a message to our family group chat. Accident happened. Sam fell from cliff. Can't reach her. Calling 911. Then I called 911 myself, reporting Kevin's fall as a hiking accident. My brother slipped and fell from the cliff. I told the dispatcher, providing our exact location. I can't see him and he's not responding to my calls. I spent the next several hours with search and rescue teams, playing the role of traumatized sister who had watched her brother fall to his death. It wasn't difficult to appear shaken. I genuinely was traumatized, just not for the reasons everyone assumed. The search teams quickly located Kevin's body and confirmed his death was consistent with an accidental fall. During the recovery operation, I overheard one of the searchers mention that Kevin's injuries suggested he had been trying to grab onto something as he fell, which supported my story that he had slipped while trying to help me. These cliff areas are dangerous in winter conditions, the lead searcher told me. Your brother probably lost his footing on a patch of ice or loose rock. It happens more often than people realize. I nodded numbly, playing my part while secretly marveling at how perfectly Kevin's own murder plot had become the cover story for his accidental death. The drive back to Cedar Falls that evening was surreal. I was supposed to be dead, Kevin was actually dead, and my family was expecting to hear that their insurance fraud scheme had succeeded. Instead, I was returning home with news that would devastate them for entirely different reasons. When I arrived at my parents' house around 10 p.m., I found the entire family gathered in the living room. They all looked up expectantly as I entered, their faces showing a mixture of anticipation and nervous excitement. Samantha. Mom exclaimed, jumping up from the couch. Thank God you're safe. When Kevin texted about an accident, we were terrified. Dad stepped forward, his expression confused. Where's Kevin? Is he okay? The moment of truth had arrived. I took a deep breath and delivered the news that would shatter their carefully planned conspiracy. Kevin's dead, I said quietly. He fell from the cliff while we were hiking. The search and rescue team recovered his body this afternoon. The silence that followed was profound. I watched my family's faces as they processed this information. Not the news they were expecting, not the outcome they had planned for. Ashley was the first to speak. What do you mean he fell? How did Kevin fall? We were at the viewpoint taking photos, I explained, sticking closely to the version I had given to authorities. Kevin got too close to the edge and slipped. I tried to grab him, but I couldn't reach him in time. Mom collapsed back onto the couch, her face pale. This can't be happening. Not Kevin. Not after everything he's been through. Dad stood frozen, staring at me as if trying to process how their plan had gone so catastrophically wrong. You're saying Kevin? Kevin is the one who fell. The search and rescue coordinator said it was probably ice or loose rocks, I continued. These accidents happen at Devil's Lake every year. Kevin just got too close to the edge. What followed was hours of what appeared to be genuine grief from my family. They had lost Kevin, not according to their plan but in the exact scenario they had designed for my death. The irony seemed lost on them in their shock and mourning. But I was watching their reactions carefully, looking for signs that they understood what had really happened. Did they suspect that their murder plot had somehow backfired? Were they wondering if I had discovered their plan and turned it against Kevin? Over the next few days, as funeral arrangements were made and insurance claims were filed for Kevin's death, I monitored my family's behavior for any indication that they suspected the truth. What I discovered was that they were proceeding with their original plan, just with a different victim. 3 days after Kevin's funeral, I overheard a conversation between my parents that revealed they were now planning to kill me at a later date, using Kevin's death as additional emotional manipulation to get me to lower my guard. We can't do anything too soon, Dad was saying to Mom in the kitchen while I was supposedly napping in the living room. It would be suspicious if Samantha died right after Kevin. We need to wait at least 6 months. But we still need the money, Mom replied. Kevin's life insurance will help with some of the debt, but it's not enough. We still need Samantha's policy. We'll figure out another method. Maybe make it look like she can't cope with losing Kevin. Suicide would be more believable now that she's experienced trauma. I realized that Kevin's death hadn't ended their insurance fraud scheme. It had just given them a new angle for murdering me. They were now planning to use grief over Kevin's death as justification for my supposed suicide. That conversation convinced me that I needed to take decisive action to expose their conspiracy before they could develop a new plan for my murder. I spent the next week gathering additional evidence while pretending to grieve Kevin's loss. I recovered the deleted text messages from Kevin's phone using data recovery software. I researched my family's financial records to document their motive. I recorded conversations where they discussed their ongoing need for insurance money. Most importantly, I consulted with a criminal defense attorney in Des Moines who specialized in insurance fraud cases. Attorney Sarah Martinez listened to my story with growing amazement and alarm. This is one of the most elaborate insurance fraud conspiracies I've ever encountered, she told me after reviewing my evidence. Your family didn't just plan to commit murder. They created an entire fictional narrative to support their claim and eliminate suspicion. What should I do? I asked. They're already planning to try again with a different method. We need to involve law enforcement immediately, she replied. But we also need to be strategic about how we present this case. Insurance fraud investigators will want ironclad evidence, and your family will claim they're being framed by a grieving sister who's not thinking clearly. Together, we developed a plan to expose my family's conspiracy while protecting me from their next murder attempt. The plan involved cooperation with both local police and insurance fraud investigators, careful documentation of their ongoing criminal discussions, and a dramatic confrontation that would force them to reveal their guilt. But first, I needed to disappear for a while to prevent them from acting on their new plan before law enforcement could intervene. I told my family I was taking bereavement leave from work to process Kevin's death and would be staying with friends in Chicago for a few weeks. This gave me time to work with investigators while staying safe from any immediate murder attempts. From my hotel room in Chicago, I coordinated with Detective James Walsh of the Cedar Falls Police Department and Agent Lisa Chong from the Iowa Insurance Fraud Bureau. They were building a case based on my evidence but needed additional proof of my family's ongoing criminal intent. "We can prove they planned the original murder," Detective Walsh explained during one of our phone conferences. "But unless we can show they're still actively planning to kill you, they might be able to claim the text messages were just dark humor or hypothetical discussions." That's when we developed the plan that would ultimately bring them down. I would fake my own death in a way that would expose their fraud while they tried to collect the insurance money. Agent Chong had experience with staged death investigations and knew exactly how insurance companies responded to suspicious claims. If your family tries to collect on your policy after a questionable death, they'll trigger multiple investigations that will uncover all the evidence we've collected. The plan was risky but elegant. I would stage a death that looked suspicious enough to warrant investigation but legitimate enough that my family would believe they could collect the insurance money. When they filed the claim, investigators would be waiting with evidence of their conspiracy. Detective Walsh would coordinate the fake death scene to ensure it was convincing but legally sound. Agent Chong would monitor the insurance claim process to document my family's fraud attempts. And I would remain hidden until the moment came to expose their crimes in court. But first, we needed to create a death scenario that my family would believe while giving investigators the evidence they needed to prove conspiracy. The staged death was planned for 2 weeks later at a remote cabin in Minnesota that I rented under a false name. The scenario would be a supposed suicide by overdose, motivated by grief over Kevin's death and financial stress from taking time off work. I would leave behind a suicide note expressing despair about Kevin's death and guilt about not being able to save him. The note would be genuine enough to convince my family while containing subtle clues that would alert investigators to the fraud. Detective Walsh would discover my body and ensure the scene was processed correctly. Agent Chong would monitor my family's response to news of my death. And Sarah Martinez would coordinate the legal response when they filed their insurance claim. The plan required precise timing and coordination between multiple agencies, but everyone involved was motivated by the elaborate nature of my family's conspiracy and their ongoing threat to my life. 2 weeks after Kevin's funeral, I checked into the remote Minnesota cabin and began the final phase of exposing my family's insurance fraud scheme. That night, I called my parents to tell them I was struggling emotionally and considering harming myself. The call was recorded by investigators and would later serve as evidence that my family had advance warning of my supposed suicidal state but made no effort to get me help. "I can't stop thinking about Kevin," I told them tearfully. "I keep replaying the accident and wondering if I could have saved him. Maybe if I had been faster or stronger or—" "Honey, you can't blame yourself," Mom interrupted, though her tone suggested she was pleased by my apparent breakdown. "Kevin's death was an accident. There was nothing you could have done. I don't know if I can live with this guilt," I continued. "Maybe it would be better if I was with Kevin." Instead of expressing alarm at this suicidal statement or offering to come help me, my parents made vague suggestions about getting professional help while encouraging me to take all the time you need to process my grief. Their lack of genuine concern for my welfare would later be used as evidence of their ongoing criminal intent. The morning of my staged death, I took one final walk around the remote cabin in Minnesota where I would supposedly end my life. Detective Walsh had arrived early to coordinate the scene, bringing with him a team of specialists who would ensure every detail looked convincing while preserving evidence of the fraud. "Are you ready for this?" he asked as we reviewed the timeline one final time. I nodded, though my stomach was churning with nervous energy. My family thinks they're about to become millionaires. Instead, they're about to become defendants. The staged death scene was carefully crafted to look like a grief-induced suicide while containing subtle inconsistencies that would trigger an insurance investigation. I left behind a suicide note that expressed despair about Kevin's death while mentioning specific details only someone planning fraud would know. "I can't live with the guilt of not saving Kevin," the note read. "I keep thinking about that moment at the cliff when I could have grabbed him but was too slow. The insurance money won't bring him back, but at least it will help the family he left behind." The reference to insurance money in a suicide note was exactly the kind of detail that would raise red flags with investigators while appearing genuine to my family. Detective Walsh discovered my body that afternoon and initiated the death investigation. Within hours, news of my supposed suicide had reached my family in Cedar Falls. I watched their initial reactions from a safe house in Minneapolis, monitoring their phone calls and social media posts with law enforcement surveillance equipment. Their response was everything we had hoped for, shock mixed with poorly concealed excitement about the insurance payout. "I can't believe she's gone," Ashley posted on Facebook within hours of getting the news. First Kevin, now Samantha. "This family has been through so much tragedy." But her private text messages to friends told a different story. "It's horrible, but at least the life insurance will help Mom and Dad keep the house." Mom and Dad's conversations were even more revealing. Within 24 hours of my supposed death, they were already discussing how to approach the insurance company to expedite the claim. "We need to emphasize the tragic circumstances," Dad told Mom during a call that was being recorded by investigators. 2 deaths in the same family within 3 weeks. The insurance company will want to process this quickly to avoid seeming heartless. "Should we mention her financial stress?" Mom asked. She was worried about taking so much time off work after Kevin died. Perfect. Financial pressure plus grief over Kevin equals clear motive for suicide. They'll pay out without much investigation. Their callous discussion of my supposed death as a financial opportunity provided exactly the evidence investigators needed to prove their criminal intent. The funeral arrangements began immediately, with my family sparing no expense for what they claimed would be a celebration of my life. They hired the most expensive funeral home in Cedar Falls, ordered elaborate floral arrangements, and planned a large memorial service that would demonstrate their grief to the community. But I was watching their financial planning more than their grief performance. Within 48 hours of my death, Dad had contacted 3 different insurance agents to begin the claims process. Mom had made appointments with financial advisors to discuss how to invest the payout. Ashley had started browsing luxury apartments online, apparently planning to move to a bigger city once the money came through. Their behavior was being documented by multiple law enforcement agencies, creating an overwhelming body of evidence that they viewed my death primarily as a financial windfall rather than a family tragedy. The day of my funeral arrived gray and cold, perfect weather for what was supposed to be a somber occasion. I positioned myself on a hillside overlooking St. Mary's Cemetery, using binoculars to watch my own funeral procession while staying hidden among the winter bare trees. The scene below was surreal beyond imagination. A long line of cars followed the hearse carrying my empty coffin, filled with family, friends, co-workers and community members who genuinely believed they were mourning my death. My family rode in the lead car, playing their roles as devastated survivors. Father McKinley from St. Mary's Catholic Church conducted the service with appropriate solemnity. "It's tragic," he said over my empty coffin, his voice carrying across the cemetery. "Such a young life lost." Samantha Brooks was a dedicated daughter, sister, and friend who contributed so much to her community. My family wept dramatically below, their performance convincing enough to fool everyone except the law enforcement officers positioned discreetly around the cemetery. Agent Chong was among the mourners, documenting their behavior and the guest list for the investigation. But the most revealing moment came during the graveside service when Dad delivered his eulogy. Instead of focusing on memories of me or expressions of love, his speech emphasized my supposed financial generosity and the security my life insurance would provide for the family. "Samantha always took care of us," he said, his voice breaking with what appeared to be emotion. "Even in death, she's making sure her family will be okay. Her life insurance policy will pay off our debts and give us the fresh start she always wanted us to have." It was a stunning admission of motive delivered in front of hundreds of witnesses who thought they were hearing a grieving father honor his daughter's memory. In reality, they were witnessing a criminal confess to insurance fraud. After the service, mourners gathered at the community center for a reception that my family had paid for with money they didn't have, confident that the insurance payout would cover their expenses. I watched from a distance as neighbors and co-workers shared memories of me while my family accepted condolences and discussed their financial future. "The life insurance will really help," I heard Mom telling a family friend. "At least Samantha's death will have some meaning if it saves the family from bankruptcy." These conversations were being recorded by undercover officers who mingled with the mourners, gathering evidence of my family's focus on financial benefits rather than emotional loss. But the most damaging evidence came 3 days after the funeral when my family met with Harold Peterson, their insurance agent, to formally file the death benefit claim. The meeting was recorded with Mr. Peterson's cooperation, as he had been contacted by investigators and agreed to assist with the fraud investigation. "I'm so sorry for your losses," Mr. Peterson said as my family settled into chairs around his conference table. "2 deaths in one family within a month. That's almost unprecedented." "It's been devastating," Dad replied. "First Kevin's accident, then Samantha's suicide. We're still in shock." "The good news is that both policies are clear-cut," Mr. Peterson continued. "Kevin's accidental death policy will pay out $100,000. And Samantha's life insurance should provide $2 million, minus the suicide clause waiting period." My family exchanged glances. They had clearly researched the suicide clause and knew that most policies only excluded suicide for the first 2 years of coverage. My policy was 5 years old, so suicide wouldn't affect the payout. "How long does the claims process typically take?" Ashley asked, unable to hide her eagerness. "For amounts this large, there's usually a thorough investigation," Mr. Peterson explained. "But given the tragic circumstances and clear evidence of the causes of death, I would estimate 60 to 90 days for full payout." Dad leaned forward. "Is there anything we can do to expedite the process? We have substantial debts from Kevin's medical bills and funeral expenses." "I can mark both claims as priority due to financial hardship," Mr. Peterson offered. "That sometimes helps move things along." The meeting continued with my family providing detailed accounts of both deaths, emphasizing the accidental nature of Kevin's fall and the grief-induced nature of my suicide. They painted themselves as victims of tragic circumstances who deserved compassion from the insurance company. What they didn't know was that every word was being recorded and that Mr. Peterson was asking specific questions designed to elicit incriminating responses. "Did Samantha ever mention feeling suicidal before Kevin's death?" he asked. "Never," Mom replied firmly. "She was always the stable one in the family. Kevin's death just pushed her over the edge." "And you had no indication she might harm herself when you last spoke to her?" Dad answered this one. "She called us the night before and sounded depressed, but we thought she just needed time to grieve. If we had known she was seriously considering suicide, we would have gotten her help immediately." This statement directly contradicted the recorded phone call where I had explicitly expressed suicidal thoughts and they had shown no concern. The lie would later be used as evidence of their criminal consciousness of guilt. The insurance claim was officially filed that afternoon, triggering the next phase of the law enforcement operation. Within 48 hours, investigators from multiple agencies descended on Cedar Falls to execute search warrants and make arrests. I was brought back from Minneapolis under police protection to witness the culmination of our elaborate sting operation. From an unmarked police vehicle, I watched as my family was arrested at their home on charges of insurance fraud, conspiracy to commit murder and attempted murder. The shock on their faces when they realized they had been caught was profound. Ashley actually fainted when Detective Walsh read her rights. Mom kept repeating, "This can't be happening," as if denial could somehow change reality. Dad just stood in stunned silence, apparently unable to process how their perfect plan had unraveled so completely. But the real shock came when Agent Chong informed them that I was still alive and had been working with law enforcement to expose their crimes. "Samantha Brooks is not dead," she announced as they sat in the police station interview room. "She has been assisting with this investigation since discovering your plan to murder her for insurance money." The silence that followed was absolute. I watched through one-way glass as my family processed this information. Not just that their insurance fraud had failed, but that I had been actively working against them for weeks. Ashley was the first to speak. "That's impossible. We went to her funeral. We buried her." "You buried an empty coffin," Detective Walsh replied. "The entire death scene was staged to document your criminal conspiracy." Dad's face cycled through disbelief, anger, and finally resignation. "She set us up." "Actually, you set yourselves up," Agent Chong corrected. "Ms. Brooks simply gave you enough rope to hang yourselves with." The interrogations that followed revealed the full scope of their planning and their complete lack of remorse for attempting to murder me. When presented with evidence of their text messages, financial research, and recorded conversations, They initially tried to claim it was all a misunderstanding or dark humor taken out of context. But the evidence was overwhelming. The detailed planning, the staged social media campaign, the deliberate manipulation of Kevin's accident to create cover for my murder. It all painted a picture of premeditated crime motivated by pure greed. Mom was the first to break, admitting that they had planned to kill me but claiming it was only because they were desperate and saw no other way to solve their financial problems. "We weren't evil people," she sobbed during her interrogation. "We were just drowning in debt and saw the insurance money as our only salvation." "So you decided to murder your daughter," Detective Walsh stated flatly. "We thought it would be quick and painless," she replied, as if that somehow justified attempted murder. "And the money would help the whole family, not just us." Ashley tried a different approach, claiming that killing me would have been a mercy because I was so depressed about Kevin's death. "She was suffering so much after Kevin died," Ashley told investigators. "In a way, we were putting her out of her misery while helping the family at the same time." Only Dad maintained his innocence throughout the interrogation process, claiming he had been manipulated by the others and never seriously intended to go through with the murder plot. But the recorded evidence contradicted all their claims of good intentions or diminished responsibility. Their own words proved they had planned my death with calculated precision and viewed it primarily as a financial transaction. The trial began 8 months later and lasted 3 weeks. I testified about discovering their plan, the staged death operation, and the psychological impact of learning that my family valued me at exactly $2 million. Dead. "They didn't just want to kill me for money," I told the jury during my victim impact statement. "They wanted to be seen as grieving heroes who had lost everything but still supported each other. They planned to use my death to generate sympathy while they spent my life insurance money." The evidence presented during the trial was overwhelming. Phone records, financial documents, recorded conversations, and the elaborate staging of Kevin's camping trip all supported the prosecution's case that this was a carefully planned murder conspiracy. Most damaging was the recording of their meeting with the insurance agent, where they had lied about my mental state and their knowledge of my suicidal thoughts while actively pursuing the money from my supposed death. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. Dad and Mom were each sentenced to 25 years in prison for conspiracy to commit murder and insurance fraud. Ashley received 20 years for her role in planning the scheme. During the sentencing hearing, I was again given the opportunity to address my family directly. This time I chose to focus on the broader impact of their crimes rather than personal betrayal. "You didn't just try to kill me," I said, looking at each of them in turn. "You betrayed everyone who mourned at my funeral. Everyone who comforted you in your supposed grief. Everyone who believed your lies about being victims of tragedy. You turned an entire community into unwitting participants in your fraud scheme." None of them would meet my eyes as I continued. "The worst part is that you never saw me as a person worth loving. I was just a financial asset to be liquidated when you needed money. But you failed to understand that people who are loved don't stay dead when you try to bury them." After the trial, I sold my life insurance policy and donated the proceeds to organizations that support victims of family violence and financial abuse. I also established a scholarship fund in Kevin's name, not because he deserved to be honored, but because I wanted something positive to come from his death. I left Cedar Falls permanently, building a new life in Seattle where I could start fresh without the constant reminder of my family's betrayal. I kept in touch with a few genuine friends from home, but I never returned to visit the town where I had supposedly died. 3 years later, I received a letter from Mom in prison. She claimed to have found religion and wanted my forgiveness for what they had done. The letter was full of self-serving justifications about their financial desperation and claims that they had never really intended to go through with the murder. I read the letter once, then destroyed it without responding. Some betrayals are too fundamental to forgive, and some family relationships are too toxic to rebuild. Today, I'm happily married to Marcus, who helped me heal from the psychological trauma of discovering my family's true nature. We have a daughter who will grow up knowing that family is defined by love and loyalty, not by shared DNA or financial obligation. Sometimes people ask if I regret exposing my family's crimes instead of just disappearing and starting over somewhere else. The answer is always no. By staging my own death and letting them reveal their true nature, I not only survived their murder plot but ensured they could never hurt anyone else. They plan to kill me for $2 million and spend the rest of their lives enjoying the money while playing the role of grieving family members. Instead, they're spending the rest of their lives in prison while I'm building a life worth living. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's getting justice and moving on to something better than anything your enemies could have destroyed. The end. Have you ever discovered that people you trusted were planning to harm you? How did you protect yourself and find justice? Share your stories of survival and resilience in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more tales of turning the tables on those who underestimate us. Remember, family should value you for who you are, not for what you're worth on paper. Thank you for following Samantha's journey from intended victim to triumphant survivor. May we all find the courage to recognize our true worth and protect ourselves from those who would diminish it for their own gain. Poor Victoria, still struggling to find her path? The words floated across my mother's perfectly manicured garden during our annual family brunch. Aunt Marie's voice carried that special tone reserved for discussing life's disappointments, like her struggling niece who just couldn't seem to get it together. I stirred my mimosa, watching condensation drip down the glass while my cousin Olivia detailed her latest promotion at Anderson Financial. Senior VP of Operations, Aunt Marie announced proudly, loud enough for the entire garden to hear. And only 32. The youngest in the company's history. I was 32 as well. A fact Aunt Marie never failed to emphasize when highlighting the growing gap between her daughter's success and my apparent failure. What are you doing these days, Victoria? Uncle Peter called out, more confrontation than question. Still with that little property management company? I nodded, taking a small sip of my drink. Something like that. Property management, Aunt Marie sighed, shaking her head. Collecting rent checks and unclogging toilets. With your education. Yes, my education. Stanford Business School. The same as Olivia. Except she'd gone straight to Anderson Financial, climbing the corporate ladder with religious dedication. I'd chosen a different path. She's not just collecting rent checks, Mother, Olivia interjected with what she probably thought was kindness. She's an assistant property manager now, right, Vicky? I didn't correct her. Let them think I spent my days chasing late payments and dealing with broken elevators. The truth was far more interesting, but timing was everything. I'm doing fine, I said quietly. Fine isn't thriving, Aunt Marie countered. Look at Olivia, corner office, company car, summer house in the Hamptons. That's thriving. I glanced at my simple dress, carefully chosen Chanel, though they assumed it was H&M. My modest watch, Patek Philippe, disguised by its understated design, and smiled. If they only knew about my real office, or rather offices. Victoria could come work for me, Olivia offered magnanimously. We always need good people in operations. Entry level, of course, but it's a foot in the door. I thought about the document sitting on my real desk, waiting for signatures. Anderson Financial's lease on their current building was expiring, and they were desperately seeking new office space in downtown Chicago. Space I happen to own. Thanks, I said. I'll keep that in mind. Mom appeared with more mimosas, her face wearing the worried look she'd perfected over the past decade. Victoria's just taking her time finding her path, she defended weakly. Time. Aunt Marie scoffed. She's had 10 years since graduation. 10 years of, what exactly? 10 years of building something they couldn't see. Wouldn't see until I wanted them to. Remember when we thought she'd be the successful one? Uncle Peter chuckled. Top of her class at Stanford, offers from every major firm. And she chose property management, Aunt Marie finished, sighing dramatically. At least she's employed, I suppose. My phone buzzed, a text from my real estate director about another acquisition. 4 blocks in downtown Manhattan, prime location, confidential sale. I typed a quick approval while my family continued discussing my disappointments. Did you hear about the Mitchell building? Olivia announced suddenly. Anderson Financial is moving our offices there. Most prestigious address in Chicago's financial district. I took another sip of mimosa, hiding my smile. They didn't know that the Mitchell building was just one of many properties in my portfolio, all held through various shell corporations and holding companies. Probably costs a fortune, Uncle Peter mused. Prime real estate like that. The owner's some mysterious billionaire, Olivia continued. Nobody knows who really controls it. Very secretive. If they'd looked closely, they might have noticed my subtle smile. But they never looked closely at me anymore. Not since I'd disappointed them by refusing the corporate path. Victoria, Aunt Marie's voice cut through my thoughts. You should ask Olivia about employee housing benefits at Anderson. Much better than that studio apartment you're in. The studio apartment was actually a penthouse covering the entire top floor of one of my buildings. But they'd never visited. I always met them at their homes or restaurants, maintaining the illusion they'd created. I'm comfortable where I am, I said. Comfortable isn't successful, Aunt Marie pressed. When I was your age. I let her words wash over me, thinking about the meeting scheduled for tomorrow. Anderson Financial's executives, including Olivia, would be touring their potential new offices. They didn't know that every building on their shortlist belonged to the same owner. Me. At least try to make something of yourself, Aunt Marie continued. Before it's too late. My phone buzzed again, confirmation of the Manhattan purchase. Another $1 billion added to the portfolio. I excused myself to take the call, walking past the family photos on Mom's wall. Pictures of Olivia's graduations, promotions, achievements. The empty spaces where my successes should have been told their own story. Yes, I spoke softly into the phone out of earshot. Proceed with the purchase. And about tomorrow's meeting with Anderson Financial. Make sure everything's perfect. Behind me, I could hear Aunt Marie's voice carrying across the garden. Poor Victoria, still trying to figure out life while everyone else has moved forward. I smiled thinking about tomorrow. About the moment they'd finally see what I'd built while they were busy pitying me. About the look on their faces when they realized who really owned the Mitchell Building, and most of Chicago's financial district. Sometimes success doesn't need to be announced. Sometimes it's sweeter when it's revealed at exactly the right moment. And my moment was coming. 10 years is a long time to build an empire in silence. But silence, I learned, was the greatest advantage of all. It started small, a rundown building in Chicago's South Side. Everyone at Stanford thought I was crazy for turning down Goldman Sachs to manage a decrepit 12-unit apartment building. You're throwing your life away, Olivia had said over coffee shortly after graduation. Property management? Really? What she didn't know was that I'd already seen what others missed. That first building taught me everything: how to renovate efficiently, how to maximize value, how to see potential where others saw problems. I lived in one of the units, learned every aspect of property management from the ground up. Not because I had to, but because knowledge was power. Real power, not the kind that came with corner offices and fancy titles. The second building came 6 months later. Then the third. Each purchase carefully structured through different LLCs, each property held under different company names. Victoria Chin, the struggling property manager, was nowhere on the paperwork. Still in that tiny apartment? Aunt Marie would ask at family gatherings. Olivia just bought a condo in Gold Coast. I'd nod, not mentioning that I owned the building Olivia's condo was in. Or that her expensive view was courtesy of air rights I controlled. The first big break came 3 years in. A distressed office building in the financial district, 30 stories of potential that everyone else had written off. It's too risky, my first banker had warned. The renovation costs alone. But I'd done my homework. Knew the zoning laws, the air rights, the potential. 2 years and $40 million later, that building was worth 9 figures. More importantly, it gave me a foothold in downtown Chicago. My real office was on the top floor, though I never used the main entrance. A private elevator, a different name on the directory, and careful scheduling ensured no one connected Victoria Chin with Mitchell Holdings, the company quietly acquiring prime real estate across the city. You should see my new office, Olivia bragged at Christmas dinner 5 years ago. Corner suite, 42nd floor, overlooking the river. I smiled, remembering the lease negotiations for that building. Her company paid premium rates, but they thought they were getting a deal. They never knew that their rent checks, along with those from half the financial district, ended up in my accounts. The empire grew strategically. Each acquisition carefully planned, each property improved and maximized. Shell companies within shell companies, all leading back to a holding corporation in Delaware that only my most trusted advisors knew I controlled. Victoria's still trying to find herself, I overheard Mom telling her friends at the country club. At least she's stable. Stable. If they only knew about the meetings I took in New York, London, Hong Kong. About the billions in transactions that flowed through my companies. About the fact that their country club sat on land I'd acquired through a blind trust. 7 years in, I controlled most of Chicago's prime commercial real estate. 8 years, expanded to New York and Los Angeles. 9 years, international properties started joining the portfolio. Maybe Victoria could manage one of our buildings, Olivia suggested to her CEO during a family dinner last year. Once we moved to the Mitchell building. Give her some real experience. The CEO had smiled politely, not knowing he'd been negotiating their new lease with me personally, though he thought he was dealing with a mysterious European investment group. My phone buzzed, another acquisition closing. A prime block in Manhattan's financial district. $22 billion in assets now spread across 3 continents. All hidden behind carefully constructed corporate veils. Poor Victoria, Aunt Marie's voice echoed in my mind. Still struggling. The struggle, if there ever was one, had been maintaining the illusion. Living simply when I could afford entire neighborhoods. Driving a modest car when my garage held vehicles worth millions. Listening to their pity when I could have bought their companies with a month's income. But tomorrow, Anderson Financial's executive team would tour their potential new offices. Tomorrow, Olivia would walk through buildings she'd bragged about, never knowing who really owned them. Tomorrow, the carefully constructed facade would crack, just enough to let them see what I'd built while they were busy feeling sorry for me. My real estate director texted, everything ready for tomorrow's tour. All 5 buildings prepared. Good, I replied. Make sure the top floor conference room in the Mitchell building is set up exactly as discussed. I looked out from my actual office, the entire top floor of Chicago's most prestigious address. Below, the city glittered, so much of it now mine. Buildings full of people who worked, lived, and thrived in spaces I controlled. My phone buzzed again, Mom this time. Honey, are you coming to Sunday brunch? Olivia wants to tell everyone about her company's big move. I smiled, thinking about next Sunday's brunch. About how different it would be from all the others. Wouldn't miss it, I typed back. Because sometimes success doesn't need to be announced. Sometimes it just needs to be revealed at precisely the right moment. And my moment was almost here. There's something poetic about watching people discover a truth that's been right in front of them all along. I stood in my private elevator, ascending to the top floor of the Mitchell building, thinking about timing and perception. The text from my director confirmed. Anderson Financial's executive team, including Olivia, had just entered the lobby. They tour all 5 buildings on their shortlist today, not knowing each one belonged to the same owner. To me. I watched through discreetly placed cameras as they entered the first building. Olivia in her designer suit, pointing out features to her colleagues, playing the role of the successful executive perfectly. The owner has multiple properties in the financial district, their tour guide explained, following my careful script. All premium locations, all maintained to the highest standards. 4 buildings later, they arrived at the Mitchell building, my flagship property. I stood at the window of the top floor conference room watching their cars pull up. Final building of the day, I heard their guide say through the security feed. The crown jewel of Chicago's financial district. I heard the owner, some European investment group, one executive mentioned. Olivia nodded importantly. Very mysterious. Nobody knows who really controls it. I smiled, straightening my simple black dress, Armani, though they'd assume it was something far less expensive. Time to greet my guests. The elevator doors opened and their voices carried down the marble hallway. Incredible views dash. State-of-the-art facilities dash. The prestige alone dash. Then silence as they entered the conference room and saw me standing there. Victoria. Olivia's voice cracked with confusion. What are you doing here? This is a private tour. I know, I said quietly. Welcome to my building. The room froze. Olivia's perfect composure slipped for the first time in years. You're what? I gestured to the chair at the head of the table, my chair. Please everyone have a seat. We have a lot to discuss. There must be some mistake, Olivia's CEO started. We're here to meet with the owner dash. Yes, I smiled. You are. I clicked a button and the wall screens came to life, displaying my portfolio, the Mitchell building, the Anderson Tower, the Thompson Center. Property after property all under my control. This is impossible, Olivia whispered. You're a property manager. I manage properties, I corrected softly. All of them. Including every building you toured today. The CEO's face went pale as understanding dawned. The European Investment Group. One of my holding companies, I confirmed. Along with the Asian consortium you met last week, and the American trust you've been negotiating with. Olivia sank into a chair, her perfect world visibly tilting. But, you're struggling. Everyone knows. Everyone assumes, I corrected. There's a difference. My phone buzzed, a text from Aunt Marie. Darling, how's the job search going? Olivia mentioned she's touring new office buildings today. Maybe she can help. I showed the message to Olivia, whose face went from pale to crimson. 10 years, I said quietly. 10 years of poor Victoria. 10 years of pity and condescension. 10 years of building this, while you were all too busy feeling sorry for me to notice. The studio apartment. Olivia started. High penthouse, I corrected. Top floor West Tower. The little property management company? Mitchell Holdings. Current portfolio value, $22 billion. The executives were frantically whispering among themselves now, realizing they'd been negotiating with different faces of the same owner all along. Why? Olivia asked finally. Why let us think? Because perception is power, I said. And sometimes the best way to build something extraordinary is to let people underestimate you. I walked to the window looking out over my city. Now about your lease. I've reviewed your proposal. We'll pay whatever you want, the CEO interjected quickly. The Mitchell building is perfect for us. It is, I agreed. But I think we should discuss all your Chicago properties. After all, I own most of them. The meeting lasted 2 hours. By the end, Anderson Financial had a new lease agreement fair, but very much on my terms. As the executives filed out, Olivia lingered. Mom's going too. Aunt Marie will be quite surprised, I finished. Especially since she's been trying to get into the Bristol Club for years. What about the Bristol Club? I own it, I said simply. Along with most of the block it sits on. She stared at me, really seeing me perhaps for the first time in a decade. All those family brunches, the pitying looks, the suggestions about entry-level jobs. Were quite entertaining, I smiled. Though I suspect future brunches will be different. My phone buzzed again, Mum, this time. Honey, did you hear about Olivia's big office move? Maybe you could help her with the transition, learn something about corporate success. I showed Olivia the message. She laughed, a strange hollow sound. What do we tell them? She asked. Nothing, I said. The Mitchell Building's new tenant list will be published next week. Your company's name will be on it. Along with the owners. They'll all see. Exactly what I want them to see, I finished. Now if you'll excuse me, I have other meetings. Your escort will show you out. As she turned to leave, she paused. Victoria, I'm sorry. For everything. Don't be, I said quietly. Success isn't about who has the corner office or the fanciest title. It's about building something real, something lasting. Even if others can't see it yet. After she left, I stood at my window watching the sun set over my city. My phone buzzed one final time, an invitation to Sunday brunch. I smiled, thinking about the week ahead. About the moment my name would be published as the owner of half of Chicago's premium real estate. About the looks on their faces when they realized who they'd been pitying all these years. I'll be there, I texted back. Because sometimes success doesn't need to be defended or explained. Sometimes it just needs to be revealed. And watch as the truth changes everything. The scent of lilies and unspoken family tensions filled St. Mary's Cathedral as we gathered to say goodbye to Thomas Mitchell, patriarch of Mitchell Industries and the man who had shaped all of our lives in ways we were only beginning to understand. I sat in the front pew between my mother and my brother Daniel, listening to the priest deliver a eulogy that painted my father as a visionary businessman and devoted family man. All true but incomplete. What the priest didn't mention was Dad's ability to see potential where others saw failure, or his tendency to test people in ways they never realized until much later. My name is Jessica Mitchell, and at 29, I'm the family disappointment. While my older brother Daniel built a successful medical practice and my sister Lauren married into old money and social prominence, I chose a different path. One that led me away from the family's expectations and into what they considered a frivolous career in event planning. Such a beautiful service, whispered my Aunt Margaret as the final hymn concluded. Thomas would have been so proud of Daniel and Lauren. And Jessica, she added as an afterthought, at least you tried, dear. That phrase had followed me for years. At least you tried. It was the family's way of acknowledging my efforts while simultaneously dismissing them. At least you tried to build a business. At least you tried to be independent. At least you tried to prove yourself worthy of the Mitchell name. As we filed out of the cathedral, Daniel fell into step beside me. At 33, he carried himself with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted his place in the world. His medical practice was thriving, his house was featured in Architectural Digest, and his wife came from the kind of family that had buildings named after them. It's okay, Jessica, he said, putting his arm around my shoulders in a gesture that was both protective and patronizing. Not everyone can be successful like us. Dad understood that. Lauren, walking ahead of us in her black Chanel suit, turned back with a sympathetic smile. Daniel's right. You tried your best with that little event business. Dad was proud of you for trying. My little event business. That's what they called Mitchell Strategic Events, the company I'd built from nothing into something they couldn't quite understand or categorize. Because it didn't fit their definition of success. It wasn't medicine or law or marrying well. They'd never bothered to learn what it actually was. The reading of the will is scheduled for tomorrow morning, my mother said as we reached the limousines. Mr. Henderson wants all family members present at 10 o'clock sharp. James Henderson had been our family lawyer for 30 years. Handling everything from business contracts to divorce settlements. He'd watched all of us grow up, had seen every family triumph and crisis. If anyone understood the complexities of Mitchell family dynamics, it was him. That evening we gathered at the family estate for the traditional post-funeral dinner. The dining room, where we'd shared countless Sunday meals, felt smaller somehow without Dad's commanding presence at the head of the table. I spoke with the board this afternoon, Daniel said, carving the roast with the same precision he brought to surgery. They're prepared to transition leadership to me as planned. Mitchell Industries will be in good hands. Lauren nodded approvingly. Thomas always said the business needed a steady hand. Someone with proven success. They spoke about Dad in past tense, about the company as if its future had already been decided. I pushed food around my plate and thought about the late-night conversations I'd had with Dad over the past few years. The ones where he'd asked detailed questions about my business, my clients, my vision for the future. Jessica, Mom said, pulling me from my thoughts. You'll need to decide what you want to do now. With your father gone, perhaps it's time to consider more stable options. More stable than what? Than event planning, dear. It's such an uncertain field. Daniel's right that not everyone can be a doctor, but surely there's something more reliable you could pursue. I could have told them about the Fortune 500 companies that contracted my services, about the government agencies that relied on my strategic planning expertise, about the international summits I'd organized. But I'd learned years ago that explanations fell on deaf ears. We'll see what tomorrow brings, I said simply. The next morning we gathered in Mr. Henderson's office, a wood-paneled sanctuary filled with law books and the weight of family history. He sat behind his massive desk. Dad's will spread before him like a roadmap to our future. Before we begin, Mr. Henderson said, adjusting his glasses, I want you to know that your father spent considerable time crafting this document. Every decision was deliberate and carefully considered. Daniel shifted in his chair, already mentally preparing to assume control of the family empire. Lauren sat perfectly composed, her designer handbag positioned just so. Mom had her hands folded in her lap, the picture of grieving dignity. The will contains several specific bequests, Mr. Henderson continued, but the primary concern is the disposition of Mitchell Industries and the associated assets. He cleared his throat and began reading in his formal lawyer's voice. I, Thomas Mitchell, being of sound mind and body, do hereby distribute my earthly possessions as follows. The smaller bequests came first. Charitable donations, gifts to longtime employees, provisions for my mother's continued comfort. All expected, all reasonable. Then came the moment we'd all been waiting for. As for Mitchell Industries, including all subsidiaries, properties, investments, and associated assets. Mr. Henderson paused, looking directly at each of us. Everything, the business, properties, investments, goes to the daughter who proved herself capable of building something from nothing, who understood that true success cannot be inherited but must be earned. The room went completely silent. Daniel's confident smile froze on his face. Lauren's composure cracked slightly. Mom's hands tightened in her lap. The entire estate, Mr. Henderson continued, including controlling interest in Mitchell Industries, goes to Jessica Marie Mitchell. Their faces turned white as the words sank in. Daniel's mouth opened and closed without sound. Lauren's perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide her shock. Mom looked like she might faint. That's impossible, Daniel finally managed. Dad always said the business would come to me. I'm the oldest. I'm the doctor. You're the son, Mr. Henderson interrupted gently. But your father was very specific about his reasoning. He pulled out a sealed envelope. Thomas left individual letters for each of you, but he also included a statement explaining his decision. Would you like me to read it? Yes, I said quietly while the others sat in stunned silence. Mr. Henderson unfolded a document in Dad's familiar handwriting and began to read. To my family who I love deeply but who have never truly seen each other clearly. Jessica has spent the last 8 years building Mitchell Strategic Events into the premier strategic planning firm on the East Coast. While you dismissed her work as party planning, she was actually coordinating international diplomatic summits, managing crisis communications for Fortune 500 companies, and orchestrating complex logistics operations that required the skills of a military strategist. Daniel's face had gone from white to red. Party planning? Jessica plans parties. Mr. Henderson continued reading. Jessica's client list includes the State Department, the United Nations, Google, Apple, and the Federal Reserve. She has managed events for heads of state, Nobel Prize ceremonies, and corporate mergers worth billions of dollars. Her company's annual revenue exceeds that of my medical practice by 300%. Lauren's handbag slipped from her lap. That's not possible. She drives a normal car. She lives in a normal apartment. She doesn't even wear designer clothes. Jessica chose to live modestly while building her business, Dad's letter continued. She understands that true wealth lies in capability, not possessions. She has proven herself able to handle complex operations, manage large teams, and make decisions under pressure. All skills essential for running Mitchell Industries. Mom found her voice. But she never told us any of this. Mr. Henderson reached for another document. Actually, she tried many times. Your father documented several occasions when Jessica attempted to share details about her work, only to have the conversation redirected to Daniel's medical practice or Lauren's social activities. He handed me a folder I'd never seen before. Jessica, your father kept copies of all the articles written about your company. Forbes featured you last year as one of 30 under 30 in the events industry. The Wall Street Journal called your crisis management work indispensable to corporate America. The Washington Post described your diplomatic event coordination as setting new standards for international relations. I opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were dozens of articles, photos from high-profile events I'd organized, copies of contracts with companies and organizations I'd never told my family about. Dad had been following my career more closely than I'd ever realized. There's more, Mr. Henderson said. Jessica, your father included a private letter for you as well. He handed me an envelope with my name written in Dad's careful script. My hands shook as I opened it. My dearest Jessica, if you're reading this, then my family has finally learned what I've known for years, that you are the most capable and accomplished of my children. I watched you build Mitchell Strategic Events from a single client to a multi-million-dollar operation. I watched you handle crises that would have destroyed seasoned executives. I watched you coordinate events that shaped international policy and corporate strategy. Most importantly, I watched you do all of this while your family dismissed your achievements because they didn't understand them. Daniel is an excellent surgeon, but he's never managed anything larger than a medical practice. Lauren has social connections, but she's never built anything of her own. You have proven yourself capable of running complex operations, managing teams of hundreds, and making decisions that affect millions of people. Tears blurred my vision as I continued reading. Mitchell Industries needs someone who understands strategy, logistics, and leadership under pressure. Someone who can see the big picture while managing countless details. Someone who has proven herself in the real world, not just inherited a position. You're that person. You've always been that person. Now it's time for everyone else to see it too. I looked up to find my family staring at me with completely new eyes. Jessica, Daniel said slowly, you organized the G20 summit? I nodded. 3 years ago. Along with the subsequent trade negotiations. The Nobel Prize ceremony? Lauren asked faintly. Last year and this year. Plus the accompanying International Science Symposium. The Apple product launch that was featured on every news channel? Mom whispered. That was just one project. We also handled their crisis communications during the privacy lawsuit. Mr. Henderson was reading from another document. According to your father's research, Mitchell Strategic Events coordinated the logistics for the peace talks between 3 African nations last year. The ones that ended a 20-year conflict. You ended a war? Daniel's voice cracked. I coordinated the logistics for the peace talks, I corrected. The diplomats ended the war. I just made sure they had the right environment to do it. Lauren was scrolling frantically through her phone. Jessica, there are photos of you with the Secretary of State. With the Prime Minister of Canada. Is that the Pope? Vatican Summit on Climate Change, I confirmed. Beautiful venue, challenging security requirements. Why didn't you tell us? Mom asked. I thought about all the Sunday dinners where I'd tried to share my excitement about breakthrough projects, only to have Daniel change the subject to his latest surgery or Lauren redirect to her charity gala planning. I tried, I said simply. But every time I mentioned my work you assumed it was small-scale party planning. When I said I was coordinating international events, you heard, wedding planning. When I mentioned working with government agencies, you heard, corporate retreats. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat. There's one more thing. Thomas included specific instructions for the transition of Mitchell Industries. He pulled out a detailed business plan. Your father had been preparing for this transition for 2 years. He converted many of the company's operations to align with Jessica's expertise in strategic planning and crisis management. What does that mean? Daniel asked. It means Mitchell Industries is no longer just a traditional manufacturing company, I said, reading through Dad's notes. He's been transitioning us into strategic consulting and crisis management for other businesses. He restructured the entire company around your skill set, Mr. Henderson confirmed. Mitchell Industries now specializes in helping other companies navigate complex challenges, coordinate large-scale operations and manage crisis situations. Lauren was still staring at her phone. Jessica, the UN website lists you as their primary strategic events coordinator for the past 4 years. That's correct. You've been working for the United Nations for 4 years and never mentioned it? I mentioned it several times. You always changed the subject. Daniel had gone very quiet. Finally he spoke. Jessica, I owe you an apology. We all do. We've been incredibly unfair. You've been viewing success through a very narrow lens, I agreed. But Dad understood that real success isn't about prestige or social status. It's about capability and impact. What happens now? Mom asked. I looked around the room at my family, people who'd known me my entire life but had never really seen me until this moment. Now we work together, I said. Daniel, your medical expertise could be valuable for our healthcare industry clients. Lauren, your social connections could help us expand into new markets. We can build something bigger than what any of us could achieve alone. You'd want us to work with you? Lauren asked. After how we've treated you? Family is complicated, I said, echoing something Dad used to say. But it's still family. Mr. Henderson gathered his papers. Jessica, there's one final item. Your father included instructions for a celebration dinner tonight. He specifically requested that it be planned by the most capable event coordinator I know, meaning you. I smiled, thinking about Dad's sense of humor. He always did like to test people. What kind of test? Daniel asked. He wanted to see if I could plan a family dinner that would bring us together instead of driving us apart. Apparently that's more challenging than coordinating international summits. As we left Mr. Henderson's office, I felt the weight of Dad's expectations settling on my shoulders. Not just the responsibility of running Mitchell Industries, but the challenge of rebuilding relationships with family members who were finally seeing me clearly for the first time. That evening, I coordinated what might have been my most important event yet. A family dinner where we actually talked to each other instead of talking past each other. Daniel asked detailed questions about my work with the State Department. Lauren wanted to understand how crisis management worked. Mom apologized for years of dismissing my achievements. Jessica, Daniel said as we cleared the dishes, I have to ask, did you really coordinate the logistics for ending a war? I coordinated the logistics for peace talks that led to a ceasefire agreement, I clarified. The actual peacemaking was done by much more important people than me. But you made it possible, Lauren said. Without proper logistics, the talks never would have happened. That's what I do, I said. I make complex things possible by managing all the details that other people don't have time to think about. Over the following weeks, as I transitioned into running Mitchell Industries, my family slowly began to understand the scope of what I'd been building. Daniel joined the company as our healthcare consulting director. Lauren became our corporate relations manager. Mom started volunteering with our nonprofit division. The most surprising discovery came when I reviewed Dad's files and found years of notes about my career. He'd been tracking my progress more closely than I'd ever imagined, collecting articles about my work, keeping copies of testimonials from clients, documenting every achievement my family had overlooked. In his final note to me, he'd written, Jessica, you've spent years proving yourself to people who weren't paying attention. Now you can focus on proving yourself to people who matter, your clients, your employees, and most importantly, yourself. 6 months later, I stood in the conference room of our expanded offices, presenting Mitchell Industries' new strategic direction to our board of directors. The same people who'd planned to hand control to Daniel were now listening intently as I outlined our transformation from traditional manufacturing to strategic consulting. Our Q3 results show a 40% increase in revenue, I reported. We've signed contracts with 6 new Fortune 500 companies and 3 government agencies. The transition to strategic consulting has exceeded all projections. After the meeting, I walked to Dad's old office, now my office, and sat in the chair he'd occupied for 30 years. On the desk was the framed photo from that family dinner, the first one where we'd actually seen each other clearly. My phone buzzed with a message from the State Department. Jessica, we need your team to coordinate the logistics for emergency peace talks in Eastern Europe. Can you have a preliminary plan ready by tomorrow morning? I smiled, thinking about Dad's final test. He'd wanted to know if I could plan a family dinner that brought people together. Turns out, bringing people together, whether it's family members or world leaders, requires the same basic skills. Listening carefully, understanding what everyone needs, and creating an environment where real communication can happen. The difference is that world leaders are often easier to work with than family members. They usually want the same thing and are willing to negotiate in good faith. Family requires much more sophisticated diplomacy. As I started working on the preliminary peace talk logistics, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. Years of building a business while my family watched without seeing, years of proving myself to people who weren't paying attention, years of waiting for recognition that came only after Dad was gone to give it. But in the end, the recognition wasn't what mattered. The work was what mattered. The problems solved, the conflicts resolved, the complex operations made simple through careful planning and strategic thinking. Dad had understood that all along. He'd known that true success can't be inherited or given. It has to be earned through consistent excellence, one project at a time. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. Mitchell Industries, this is Jessica. Ms. Mitchell? This is the Secretary General's office at the United Nations. We have a situation developing that requires immediate strategic coordination. Are you available for an emergency consultation? I looked at the photo on my desk, at my family finally seeing each other clearly, then opened my laptop to begin another complex logistical challenge. Always available, I said. What kind of situation are we looking at? Because that's what success actually looks like. Not the moment when people finally recognize what you've built, but all the moments when you're building it, one careful decision at a time. Just like Dad always knew it would be.